have an obituary that I think you will all appreciate. Hans Erwick, he was a former harbor commissioner of 10 years, of which 8 years he was the chairman. He recently passed away at the age of 93. He was born in Rotterdam in 1929, taking his electrical engineering degree from the Netherlands Technical College. He became a pilot in the Dutch Air Force, where he spent a weekend in the brig after buzzing the parade grounds while the bigwigs were present. He married his wife Petra, they immigrated to Canada, and he made his way to US and eventually Newburyport, having many jobs in the aerospace and defense industries. He became a Canadian citizen and then a US citizen in 1980. A story he liked to tell during his US citizenship interview, being asked whether he had relationships with aliens meaning non-US persons. He was pleased to answer he slept with one every night because his wife maintained her Canadian citizenship. Quite the sense of humor. Who knew we had a Dutch Top Gunner in this community? So he will be missed. Let's take a moment of silence. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America
and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right. Clerk Jones, would you call to order?
I'd be happy to, President. For the meeting of April 11th, Councilor Preston.
Present.
Councilor Vogel.
Present.
Councilor Wallace.
Present.
Councilor Wright.
Present.
Councilor Zeed. Here. Councilor Cameron.
Here.
Councilor Donahue.
Present.
Councilor Khan.
Present.
Councilor Lane.
Here.
Councilor McCauley.
Here.
And Council President Shan.
Present.
We have 11.
Late files.
We have 4 late files. We have Order 341. You'll see it made in the packet as a late file. Blue Wave Solar Pilot Negotiation. We have Order 342, which is the CPC supplementary on the Mal Historic Restoration Walkway project. We have Communication 395, which is the Streets and Sidewalk Repair Plan. And we have Communication 406, which is a letter from the Pioneer League with respect to pickleball.
Motion to waive the rules and accept the late files.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right, late files are in. Public comment. So for those online, please raise your hand now, and I'll read off the names for the folks that will be
Want to take over? I don't feel
doing public comment online, and then when Clerk Jones brings me the clipboard, I'm going to call it. All right, so I see 6 hands online. I see 7. I see Gary Corellis, Claire, Glenn Richards, Nikki Whelan, Steve Nittmeyer, Sean Sullivan, and Ann. I can't say your last name, Ann, but I'm not going to try and butcher it. But those are the 7 from online. And then we have 11 in-house. So let's start with Gary Corellis. Gary, you're allowed to speak.
Hello,
Name?
can you hear me?
Can you all hear him?
Can you hear me?
1 second, Gary. I'm not hearing him through the. 1 second, Gary. All right, Gary, can you speak again?
Yes, can you hear me now?
Much better, much better. Thank you, Councilor Zeed.
Thank you.
So Gary, your name, your address, and you have 2 minutes.
Yes, thank you. So my name is Gary Corellis. I currently live in San Diego. I've gone on record and spoken at many meetings in opposition to the various expansion plans of the Institution Bank. I own properties at 1517 19-21 Prospect Street, directly opposite the Institution parking lot. I also own other properties in Newburyport and have owned property in the city since 1973. The proposed settlement is the same as the one that was rejected in November 2021. Nothing has changed. The conditions of the proposed settlement are cosmetic in design. The abutters and the neighbors opposed to the current plan have issues which have not been addressed. The mass, the building height, the noise, the increased traffic still need attention. The impact to the neighborhood is too great, as has been spelled out by residents at meetings. If the city council accepts the proposed settlement, it will undermine the work of the city's volunteer boards. The planning board in March of 2021 rejected the IFS project because of its size. This proposed settlement keeps the size the same, and the city council must reject it to stand by the planning board's decision. The city council must reject the proposed settlement so that the integrity of our local government may stay intact and let the IFS litigation resume in land court. I urge the city council to honor the vote taken a few months ago and to not allow the expansion of the bank as proposed. One final point, as made by Rick Tainter of the planning board, is that the addition is, quote, out of context with its surroundings, unquote. The opposition of abutters and residents speaks loud and clear as to the fabric of the area. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Corellis. Next is Claire. All right, Claire.
Can you hear me? Hi,
Yeah.
can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, it's pronounced Papa nice to see you. It's like Papa nice to see you. Okay, that's how my father taught me how to say it. Okay, thank you very much. I'm Claire Papanastasiou, formerly of 4 Otis Place, which directly abuts the bank, and now I'm currently at 3 Orange Street. I urge the council to reject the proposed institution for saving settlement before you this evening and send it back to the land court and not to the planning board. We have been here before about this very same settlement proposal. After 14 months of hard work by the Historic Commission and the Planning Board, this proposed settlement was rejected by the City Council in November for various reasons, all of which stand true today. It's a one-sided, unfair settlement. The proposed settlement undermines the Planning Board's March 2021 rejection of the bank's 16,000 square foot addition because of its size. The design as it is presented in the settlement proposal before you still fails to comport with the Downtown Overlay District ordinance because of the very issue why the Planning Board rejected the bank's plan in the first place in March: size. The City Council that rejected the proposal in November faced the same formidable applicant, the same group of engaged and passionate constituents, the same unsympathetic judge, the same fears of losing in court. Yet it still rejected this unchanged proposal settlement because it would have set a dangerous precedent and provide a playbook for circumventing the DOD. What matters right now are your actions. Councilors can tell themselves that it's best to send this proposed settlement to the planning board to opine with its expert opinion because we may fare better on appeal. That would all be true if this settlement before you differed in any meaningful way. It doesn't. The City Council rejected the proposed settlement the first time because it negated the planning board's ruling. Let the litigation play out in the land court. If the city loses there will be an opportunity before the state appeals court where a judicial panel will review the case.
Thank you.
Please reject the proposed settlement.
Glenn Richards. You are allowed to speak.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, I can be very brief because the 2 previous speakers, Glenn Richards, 6 Kent Street, Newburyport, speaking only on behalf of myself, not as part of any commission. The 2 previous speakers have said a lot of what I would totally agree with, so I won't need to repeat that. So all I say is very briefly, I hope that someone can clarify exactly what you, the council, is approving, quote unquote, tonight. With that, approving the settlement is what it says in the packet. And I most sincerely hope that you're not approving the settlement as such, but rather approving it to then have it go back to either the planning board or the land court. As I say, I'm confused. I think many people are confused. But anyway, as you probably know, I'm sure there's a lot of history to this, a lot of hard work by many people in the city, all trying to do their best for the city. So I hope you'll not do anything to bypass that process. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Richard. Glenn. All right. Next is Nikki Whelan.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, I'm here to introduce myself because I'm interested in joining the Parks Commission. I live at
Can you give me your address, please? I'm sorry.
12 Lafayette Street in Newburyport. I'm just to tell you briefly about myself. I'm a lifelong resident of Newburyport. I've enjoyed the public spaces here throughout my life. I believe in taking a role in local government when possible to help do your part. I'm a 20-year public school teacher in Boston. I'm 46 years old, and I mention that because I live with my mother and my children, and I'm interested in projects that involve multi-generational families and community members, such as community gardens. And I'm also interested in the idea of expanding access to our local parks. And that's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nikki. All right, next is Steve Nipmeyer. And you need to unmute yourself, Steve.
Okay, thank you. And hello, everyone. My name is Steve Nipmeyer, and my family lives at 4 Otis Place, where we are adjacent to the proposed project. We stand with our neighborhood and the many citizens of Newburyport who believe the City Council should vote against sending the proposed settlement to the Planning Board. The Planning Board denied this project in March of 2021. And this very council voted in November against sending this identical settlement to the Planning Board. Yet, several months later, here we are again. Please recognize the hard work of the volunteers on the Planning Board and the Historical Commission who have already said no. Please respect the important precedent that this City Council set when you voted no on this settlement in November. Please vote no. Send this matter back to Land Court, where we expect that the rightful decision by our Planning Board will be upheld. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Next is Sean Sullivan. Sean, you need to unmute yourself.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Hello, my name is Sean Sullivan. I own and reside at 9 Prospect Street, directly across from the IFS proposed development with my wife Jennifer and daughter Elle. My 10-year-old daughter said to me tonight, "Dad, after dinner, let's play soccer." And I said, I can't. I have the town meeting call, and I explained it to her. And then she said, "Dad, why are you doing that? That's the same thing all of those meetings for, and it never changes." And I didn't have an answer for her. I'm asking the City Council to vote no on sending this back to the Planning Board. First of all, I'm opposed to this development on size, scale, and massing, similar to all of my neighbors. The latest plan was an insignificant reduction in size and not enough of a reduction in size. They have been proposing minor changes over and over and over again, and this is no different. The IFS has been doing superficial designs for 2 years now. If there had been some substantial changes, construction would be underway. For new members of the council, don't let all the changes and minor things change this. They've not addressed the issue of size here. Secondly, this vote shows whether the council cares about supporting its boards and even past council members' decisions. Sending this around again undermines the authority, the import, and the hard work of our town's boards. Also, sending this again to the Planning Board creates a blueprint for other developers to get around the DOD requirements and the laws of this town. Nothing has changed in this actual proposed settlement since October of 21, except the new City Council members and the Planning Board members. Overall, these small changes do not require a new vote by the Planning Board. We keep chasing our tail on the same basic proposal. Anyone who's been in this long journey and closely involved can see it, whether it's the Historic Committee, the Planning Board, the returning City Council members, and yes, even an impatient 10-year-old. I'm asking you to vote to send this directly back to court and see how it plays out. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Sullivan. And I'm not even going to try to say your last name, Ann.
Hi, this is Ann Maciejewski. I live at 3 Garden Street, which abuts the back of the bank. And I, like all my neighbors, oppose this proposal. The size and scale of the addition hasn't changed since the last vote. And I don't understand how you voted no the last time and how now, even though there have been no changes, you can vote yes. I ask you to reject this proposal and send it back to the land court. Thank you.
Thank you, Ann. Paula Rinda?
Yes, that's correct. Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Hi, my name is Paula Renda. I live at 16 Otis Place. I urge the council to reject the settlement and send it back to the land court rather than send it to the planning board. Please vote no.
There were
I have been a part of this process for the entire time, and both Gary, Claire, and Sean expressed my sentiments exactly. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Rinda. And last here is Jared Hubbard.
Hi, my name is Jared Hubbard, and I live at 49 Boardman Street. I'm here tonight, as I have been at more than a dozen meetings over these past 2 years, to support a new home for NYS at 59 Low Street. More than a year ago, more than 1,100 Newburyporters signed a petition supporting the creation of a new home for NYS at 59 Low Street. And it's been a long road since then, but tonight you get to vote to make some real progress towards that goal. I want to thank Mayor Reardon, Kim Turner, and many of the members of this council who've been steadfast supporters of NYS for their help in getting us here. But I have to admit that what I fear tonight is that there will be those on this council who say that we need to wait to make any decisions on NYS, who want to put up roadblocks, or who want to tie any progress on NYS to their own pet projects. You know, these may be the same councilors who a year ago made excuses for why we should wait and shouldn't purchase the property, and for the last 8 years have made no progress in getting NYS into a permanent home. You know, I understand that for some of you, creating a safe place for our kids to play is simply not one of your highest priorities. For others, you're fine with our kids being, part of some proxy war that you're fighting either against the last administration or against your fellow counselors. But what I would ask you tonight is to either lead, follow, or get out of the way. While not every NYS supporter can be at every meeting, your constituents have spoken and they've signaled their support for a new home for NYS at Low Street. Every single counselor here has said that they support NYS, and you unanimously voted to buy the Low Street property for NYS. So it's time that you showed some actual support for NYS by voting to move forward with changing the zoning to allow NYS at Low Street and allocating funds for an architect to design that new home. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Hubbard. All right, that is it for the online folks. Now the folks in City Council chambers. First is Sarah Hall.
Hello, it's just the right height. Sarah Hall, 8 Arthur Welch Drive. I'm speaking tonight in support of the Fair Share Amendment. Order 340 in your packet is a proposed City Council resolution in support of the FSA. To briefly summarize, the Fair Share Amendment is a proposal to amend the Massachusetts Constitution, creating a surtax of 4% on the portion of a person's annual income above $1 million. The new revenue, estimated as $1.5 to $2 billion per year, would be spent on quality public education and affordable public colleges and universities, and for the repair and maintenance of roads, bridges, and public transportation. To ensure that the amendment continues to apply only to the highest income taxpayers, the $1 million threshold would be adjusted annually for inflation. I can speak directly to the benefit to the Newburyport Public Schools if the FSA were to pass. Although our student numbers remain steady, the needs for special education and mental health support are steadily increasing. This was the case even before the pandemic, which has only exacerbated the situation. We're now in our third and final year of federal coronavirus relief, i.e. ESSER funding. While these funds have been extremely beneficial, they will not continue beyond fiscal year 2023. In contrast, the FSA would provide a long-term sustainable source of revenue. As an additional benefit to families in Newburyport, FSA revenue would lower the cost of public higher education. Massachusetts has one of the best public university systems in the country, but also one of the most expensive. For all of these reasons, I urge you to vote in favor of the resolution in support of the Fair Share Amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Next is Rick Tainter.
Good evening, councilors. Rick Tainter, 10 Dexter Street. I'm also standing to speak in support of the resolution in support of the Fair Share Amendment. And I'm really focusing in my remarks on the transportation components. Massachusetts, as everyone knows, is seriously deficient in maintaining its roads and bridges and bringing them up to modern standards. The city of Newburyport is facing the challenge of making up for decades of deferred maintenance of our streets and sidewalks, while at the same time trying to improve accommodations for walking, cycling, and public transit as called for by the City Council's Complete Streets policy. The Fair Share Amendment will create a new and dependable source of funding for maintaining roads and bridges and for providing public transportation services. Much of the new funding generated by the Fair Share Amendment will likely go toward regional transportation networks and services. In Newburyport, that will include improving our transportation connections to other communities in the Merrimack Valley, the state-owned roads like Story Avenue and Route 1, the Gillis and Chain bridges, and the regional bus service provided by the Merrimack Valley Transit Authority. It could also provide more support for the annual funding that the city receives through Chapter 90, as well as grant programs like Complete Streets and Safe Routes to Schools, which Newburyport has used to upgrade our streets and sidewalks. In terms of public transit, the MVRTA is innovative and progressive, but the amount of state and federal funding available to regional transit agencies in Massachusetts limits the reach, directness, and frequency of services that they can provide. Fair Share Amendment funding could potentially allow MVRTA to expand their routes and provide increased frequency, making transit a more realistic way for people throughout the valley to get to jobs and services. We are also facing the urgent need to do what we can to address the climate crisis. From a transportation perspective, this requires us not only to protect our roads from increased flooding, but also to provide for modes of travel that have less impact on the climate, walking, cycling, and public transit. The funding that will become available through the Fair Share Amendment will help us make the transition to a more sustainable local and regional transportation system, which will ultimately support a stronger and more resilient economy. For all these reasons, I hope you will vote
Good
in favor.
timing.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Next up is Peter Mackin.
Good evening. My name is Peter Mackin. I reside at 13 and 11 Prospect Street. City councilors, mayor, I hope the new city council members have had the opportunity to walk this neighborhood that we live in 24 hours, 7 days a week. This city council voted against this proposed settlement last November. The proposed settlement has not changed. Has the 1,600 square foot building size changed? No. It is still too large for this congested downtown residential area. Has the Newburyport Historical Commission objected to this big addition to the bank? Yes. Several times they told the IFS that it's too large and the construction is not in keeping with the regulations for the historical properties. Has the planning board recommended that IFS reduce the size of the structure? Yes. The planning board provided considerable input to the bank on each and every building plan that they presented over a 14-month period. Ultimately, the planning board rejected the bank's final plan last March. What did the bank do? The Institution for Savings sued the city of Newburyport. The lawsuit is to still be able to build this oversized structure in an historic residential area, despite what the planning board ruled. The IFS lawsuit is also to abolish the downtown overlay district that protects the historic nature of this city. So now, should the Newburyport City Council rule your November vote against this proposed settlement to be null and void? No, you shouldn't. Considering anything other then sending it back to the land court would be very wrong.
2 minutes.
The
is up.
city council and our mayor should support all due diligence of our volunteer boards and not signal to the future
Mr. Mackin,
developers to override them by threatening to sue the city.
Your 2 minutes is up. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next is Jared Mercer.
Jared Mercer, I'm at 125 Low Street. I'm here to speak in favor of the Fair Share Amendment. The first thing I notice about the Fair Share Amendment is not very aptly named. I don't think it's actually about fairness, but equality and justice, much bigger ideas. Things like the Fair Share Amendment are so important, not just because they're fair, though it is that and more, but because they are retraining us to live together in new ways toward justice and harmony. Because just like everything else, economics is always about our relationships with one another, about how our humanity touches others, about how negotiating each other's needs with our own, and hopefully for the common good. And being that it's about justice, and that justice is always mercy, and mercy is always love, we recognize that something like the Fair Share Amendment is not just, again, fair, but about love of neighbor. And if we don't realize that this is all based on our relationships with one another, then we'll continue to fail and to reproduce cycles that create victims in our societies and that show the need for self-preservation over others, and cycles that further impoverish those who are poor for no other reason than we continue to live under the pretense that our economy is about anything other than our relationships with one another. And because we're trained in certain ways of living and thinking within these pretentious cycles, we need things that reshape us, things that re-educate us on how to live together in love, that change our minds and actions, whether they're policies or community organizations or faith communities or other things. And the Fair Share Amendment is something that has the opportunity to guide us into new ways of relating to one another. And so I ask you to support this resolution, not just because it's logical and makes sense, but because it's the kind of society we want to be in and become. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mercer.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Peter McNamee.
Hi, excuse me. Peter McNamee, 9 Otis Place in town. I'm also a member of the Historic Commission, but because I'm a resident, I did recuse myself from all the deliberations and public comment about this topic on the Institution for Savings expansion. Councilors, I don't know why we're here, and that's been said several times already. I don't understand why we're here, but I do know that I wrote a letter to the Daily News, which unfortunately didn't make it into the paper in time for this meeting, but you all have a copy of it that I sent last week, saying that if this does get forwarded on to the planning board, I'll resign from the Historic Commission. Now, that to me even sounds like a dramatic and unnecessary step almost, and it's certainly not going to make any impression on the bank, but that's neither here nor there. It's meant to make an impression on you, that the efforts that these volunteers go through are significant. It's a heavy lift. This has been hours and hours of deliberation with the Historic Commission and the Planning Board, all potentially to be thrown aside. For no apparent reason, it's been settled. Let it play out in court. Earlier this evening, you had a woman speak to introduce herself because she wants to be on the Parks Commission, I think it was. You have a willing volunteer. This is a woman who wants to work hard for the city. Do you want her to see the city turn its back on 2 important commissions, on an important topic, and just cast aside all of our effort? I don't think so. I urge you to vote this down tonight and not send it along to the planning board. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mark Griffin.
Mark Griffin, 3 Orange Street. Good evening, Madam Council President, members of the council. I'm a former direct abutter to this project. I used to live at 4 Otis Place. My wife and I and countless other citizens and neighbors participated in the 14 months of hearings where the Historical Commission and the Planning Board painstakingly reviewed this matter. Ultimately, the Planning Board denied it based mainly on the size of the addition. The proposed settlement does not alter the size and merely makes some slight cosmetic changes. This settlement is tantamount to overturning the original Planning Board denial and turning it into an approval. This is the same settlement which was presented to the council for approval in November and was denied, and nothing has changed, as you've heard before from other people, except the makeup of the council itself. Presumably, taking another stab at it with different people might get a different outcome. Passing this on to the Planning Board, you should know, is likely to be a fait accompli. They will receive a settlement endorsed by the City Council as its preferred course of action. Further, they will only have 2 hearings to deal with it and no input from the Historical Commission, which we normally have under the Downtown Overlay District. I submit that most volunteer board members will vote yes on something like this because they believe that is what they're being asked to do by city government. I believe that this order has been brought forward because Councilor Shan genuinely believes this is in the best interest of the city. This, however, does nothing to alleviate how discouraging it is to have to still be opposing this project after all of this time. I couldn't disagree more with Councilor Shand on this issue. A better course is to deny this settlement and allow litigation to play out. This will show support for your volunteer board members, the interested neighbors and citizens, and it will send a message to applicants that the city is not a pushover. As councilors, you are charged with setting policy. These considerations constitute good litigation policy beyond just evaluating the strength and weakness of each individual case. Please vote no on this settlement.
Thank you, Mr. Griffin.
Thank you.
Ann Clausen.
Good evening, Madam President, councilors. My name's Anne Marie Clausen. I live at 3 Otis Place with my husband and our high school daughter, who attends public school, a public school teacher in special ed, directly across from the bank. We have been through this process from the very beginning. Everything that our neighbors have said, we completely agree with. We've shown up to, or I've shown up, or my husband and I have shown up to every meeting, Zoom meetings, sent letters. There's been so many hours spent by everyone in the neighborhood, as well as the counselors. Please respect the past counselors and their decision by voting no on this tonight and let it go to land court. It just, I wish I could come up with something that was just so gravitatingly obvious for you that would make you say, wow, okay, that's a great point. But we've said it over and over and over. And I'm sure everyone's as sick of hearing it as we are as sick of saying it. So I'm just begging you to please respect the past counselors and the city of Newburyport and let this go back to land court. Thank you.
Thank you, Ann. Adam Costa.
Thank you, Madam Council President and councilors. I'm Adam Costa. I represent the Institution for Savings, and I'd like an opportunity to address and maybe rebut many of the statements that have been made. I think there have been some inaccuracies and some misstatements, but I also appreciate that I have 2 minutes, and so I likely can't do that. But I'd like to make just 3 brief points if I could. The first is a question that was asked by a resident earlier, which was, why are we here, and what is the council being asked to do? And I would again characterize it differently than some of the residents have. I would not say that you're being asked to approve the merits of a settlement. I would say that what you're being asked to do today is to approve a remand to the planning board so that the planning board can consider the merits of a settlement. And so you say, okay, is it 6 of one, half dozen of the other? What's the difference? And so I guess the second point I'd like to make is why. Why would you reconsider? And the reason for that is sort of twofold. The first is the council made a commitment, some of you and some former councilors, to engage in a mediation process. Councilors' time was spent, planning board members' time was spent, including the chair of the planning board. Time of representatives of the city, the administration was spent in mediation, not just for a few hours, but for a day and a half, resulting in a mediation agreement with certain parameters, including a remand to the planning board. The second point I'd like to make, and I think it's important, is that the judge has expressed some question as to the appropriateness of a process where the city council dictates whether a remand should or shouldn't occur. And I think that that is new news that wasn't available to you just a few short months ago. The final point I'd like to make is I've heard questions about the integrity of the DOD, and that by sending it back to the planning board, you are challenging the very integrity. I would argue just the opposite. I would say that the integrity of the DOD is part and parcel of the pending litigation, and that by sending this back to the planning board and giving the planning board a bite at the apple to consider the merits of a proposal that was reached in mediation, that is preserving the integrity of the DOD and giving the planning board the opportunity, preserving for it the authority that it has under the DOD ordinance. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next is Nicholas Metcalf.
Nicholas Metcalf, 27 Fair Street, Newburyport. Thank you, Madam Chairman. I am here because I believe you are voting tonight on funding the architects who are developing the plan for the waterfront. I have been involved in this for probably more than 25 years. Some people have been involved longer than that. And I just want to make one point. In a meeting fairly recently, it may be in this room, somebody said we need something to pull more people to Newburyport, to help the economy, to help the businesses. Well, I just would like to relate one thing, Madam Chairman. Probably 10, 15 years ago, when we were the committee of the Open Waterfront, we're down there collecting signatures to try and keep the land open and stop buildings. The thing that struck me was a summer evening. Well over half of the people who we got to sign our petitions were not from Newburyport. They weren't even from Newbury, they weren't from West Newbury. They were from quite a ways away, New Hampshire, central Massachusetts, south towards Beverly. The Newburyport people were really the minority. And they had come up here that evening to walk on the waterfront, enjoy themselves, and maybe spend some time in one of the businesses here. And I would just like to say that I can think of nothing that would pull people more to Newburyport than having this park finished. As to my knowledge, it's the only open waterfront north of Boston. You can correct me on that. I think it's the only open waterfront. And I think it would be a tremendous economic benefit. Therefore, ladies and gentlemen, councilors, I really urge you to please continue funding the architects so we can move forward with this plan of the park. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Metcalf. And last but not least, Richard Malozzi.
Hi, my name is Richard Malazzi. My family lives at 16 Prospect Street. I'd like to voice my opposition to returning the proposed settlement to the Planning Board for a redundant review. Although I support the Institute's right to expand, I find the scale of the proposed expansion to be highly detrimental to the character of the neighborhood and of the city. The central elements of this proposed settlement are identical to those that were rejected by the Planning Board after an exhaustive review of a complicated issue. The rationale for sending a nearly identical proposal back to the Planning Board to be reviewed a second time is weak at best and undermines the hard work and legitimacy of the Planning Board. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. And that is it for public comment. Thank you, everyone. All right. Next up is the mayor's comment.
Good evening, everyone. Thanks for having me tonight. I'm going to be brief. You guys have a full docket tonight. First, I just want to give a quick shout out to Bill Josius. I was able to go to his birthday party this week, 104 years old, World War II veteran, served from 1942 to 1946 in the South Pacific. Just an absolutely super guy. I told him to watch tonight. So, Bill, if you're watching, I hope you got a great birthday week. The 5-year streets and sidewalks plan. We're continuing to move through this process. One of the last things on your Agenda tonight is the approval for the ARPA funding for years 1 and 2 of the plan. I would really appreciate your support with this initiative. This is going to be a huge first step to get these first 2 years underway. We're just about finishing up Boardman Street here in the next couple weeks, and then we are going to be ready to go with this plan as long as we have funding in place. So again, I would appreciate your support. 59 Low Street and Brown School. And like I said, I'm not going to try not to read this because I sent this to all of you today. We're continuing to work through that process as well. I've said from the very beginning, I envision the future home of the Newburyport Youth Services at 59 Low Street. Tonight, I believe you have a transfer order in from the Kelly School funds that will allow us to work with an architecture firm to work out a design concept for not only NYS on 59 Low Street, but also to look at the Brown School gym to see the future there. I think both of these projects could be NYS assets down the road. But I think we still need to go through that process. And I think a lot of this is connected to that compromise we made a couple months ago to purchase this building. So again, I'm appreciative of the process. I think we still need to go through it. We need to get our information and keep moving forward. So again, I would appreciate your support in sending that on to committee tonight. I'm not going to talk about that right now. Also, you'll see the plan tonight, the strategic plan. I was going to do a presentation tonight, but then I saw how much you had on your agenda, so we are going to move my strategic plan presentation to committee. It's going to be moving to general government, and so we will do that there. Just quickly to highlight a few things on the strategic plan. It's kind of based around 4 pillars, and I think, again, if you've looked at it yet, the first one being secure and invest in the city's infrastructure. Second one being provide high-quality public services. Third, guide future development of the city. And finally, lead in building a collaborative and engaged city. So again, we'll talk about that more in general government, but I just wanted to give you a little background in that. And I believe this is already posted on the website too, strategic plan. So again, you can go to cityofnewburyport.com and check out that strategic plan. The Harbor Master this week got the docks in, which is a really great sign of spring. They also, along with police and fire, participated in a graded exercise with FEMA on a power plant radiological event, and I'm told it went very well. It was a successful exercise. The city is launching a citywide organics composting expansion plan with the NHS Environmental Club and the National Honor Society. We've talked about this a lot over the past year, so it's just going to be really an informational campaign trying to increase the usage of composting throughout the city. Youth services, nothing really going on at youth services. Oh, wait a second. Yes, yep, they're looking for a new home. But besides that, they are also looking for summer help. So if you have kids at home, they are looking for summer rec leaders, 15 years and older, and then site coordinators, 18 years and older, to work with kids 4 to 14. They have had very few people apply this year. So again, if your kids are looking for summer work, that's a great job for the summer. Finally, the health department is put together in coordination with my office, has put together a blood drive for May 3rd. I approached the health department about this from my good friend Jeff Stone, who passed away this past year. Just a good way to donate blood, honor his memory. And again, you have to sign up online, so you'll see it in the packets tonight, but you also can go to the city website, sign up online. There's a few slots remaining, and if that fills up, then we're going to do another one. So again, I would appreciate all your support in that. Finally, this fair share amendment, more money for us for cities and sidewalks and in schools, I'm all for it. So again, that's in your packet tonight too. But have a great meeting. Thank you.
Thank you.
I also want to acknowledge the former mayors in the room. It's great to have 2 former mayors in the room tonight as well.
Any questions for the mayor? Seeing none, thank you, Mayor Reardon. All right, Clerk Jones, moving on. Consent agenda.
Agenda this evening consists of the following: the approval of minutes for March 28th. There's a number of communications. Communication 402 is a letter with respect to open space at 12 Cushing Avenue to go to general government. We have 2 applications, Flag Day, June 11th, and the Pioneer League Tag Day, May 7th. They're both to go to public safety. We have communication, the annual audit for the city, FY 2021, to go to Budget and Finance. We have another application for an event, Spring Fest, by the Chamber of Commerce, May 14th and 15th, to go to Public Safety. 2 communications, an opinion from KP Law regarding property disposition, and communication 405, Mayor's Strategic Plan, both to go to General Government, the latter to go to Committee of the Whole also. We have two transfers. Transfer 123, it's fire foam equipment, 2,000, hose fit, 3,000, eventually to go to fire software, 8,100. That's to go to Budget and Finance. The next transfer, 124, with respect to the sale of municipal buildings to go to the NYS Center Schematic Design. That is pulled out at the request of Councilor Vogel. And then we have the following appointments. 308 Marcy Neville, 16 Marin Road, Council on Aging until 4/29/2027. Jeanette Isabella, 100 Water Street, Emma Andrews until 4/29/2023. Rebecca Rignett, 25 Barton Street, Trust Fund Commission, 4/15/2025. Nicole Whalen, 12 Lafayette Street, Parks Commission, 4/29/2027. And George Arinia, 19 Essex Street, Cultural Council until 4/29/2025. Following items are out of their respective committees. Market Landing Committee, Order 326, Budget and Finance, Orders 333 and 335. General Government, Order 324, 332, and 337. Communication 401. Neighborhood and City Services, Ordinance 109. Communication 395. Skipping over Planning and Development, we have Public Safety, Application 67, the Lions Club Road Race on 8/2/2022, and Order 331, a loading zone change on Green Street. And that, with that one change, is the consent agenda.
I see Councilor Cons.
Yes, Council President. I did want to make a note of the appointment 308 for the Council on Aging, and I think this council approved a 3-year term for the Council on Aging. Would that go into effect for this upcoming appointment? My guess is it would, since it passed before this. So that would be 3 years. So
it would be 3 years. So that was, I don't know if it's, that was passed last meeting, was second
right,
reading.
which was March 27th.
I assume it's signed by the mayor. So I assume it's law.
I
So I assume my math needs correction.
Okay. Well, it's a hot off the press change. So it's, so 2025 is what I would make a adjustment to that.
I wouldn't argue with that math. Okay. So with that change, that's the consent agenda.
Yeah. So motion to approve the consent agenda as adjusted.
Thank you.
All those in favor? Aye. All those opposed? All right. Consent agenda is set.
Council President,
Yes.
I would ask that you consider moving the sequencing of Order 332 up from its current spot to the next item on the agenda.
Is there a second for that? All right, so everyone appreciates this is the Institution for Saving Order, Order 332. Moving it up in the agenda now so we can act on it. All those in favor of moving it up, say aye. Aye. All those opposed? Nay. All right, so with that being said, I would like to note there is a piece of paper on everyone's desk that has an amendment that I would like to bring in. Clerk Jones, would you like to read the update?
Yeah, it essentially the same with the, but I'll read it to you so that we understand. The City Council of the City of Newburyport hereby agrees to jointly request a remand to the Planning Board to be conducted pursuant to the terms of the settlement agreement dated October 4th, 2021, and attached hereto and referred to as Attachment A, as amended to extend the Planning Board's time for decision and filing to June 3rd, 2022, of the appeal to the Land Court, docket number 21, etc., of Planning Board decision concerning the Institution for Savings for the purpose of allowing the Planning Board to reconsider the decision on appeal. Said settlement agreement was entered into by between the City of Newburyport and the Institution for Savings as a mediation with the Honorable Mitchell Kaplan, serving as mediator, and further includes the following, to wit, Exhibit 1, the colored renderings of the proposed changes. And that is it, Council President.
I believe there was a line at the beginning, in order to jointly request the Land Court to remand to the Planning Board for further consideration. Is there a second for an amendment So I would like to get this,
I'll second that.
okay. So
I'm sorry, who's the first on that?
who wants to be the first? I would be the first.
Okay.
Okay. All right, so for discussion, I would like to have our city solicitor, who is here in the room right now, Counselor Lane, Attorney Lane, excuse me. Would you explain in non-legalese what the first line truly means so that the whole city council understands what we're trying to do here?
Sure. And again, you're referring to the title there, or?
Yes.
Again, it reads, in order to jointly request the land court to remand to the planning board for further consideration, litigation between the city and the institution for savings relating to an appeal of a planning board decision. This, again, is a procedural outline. Again, under the city's charter, the city council has the role of approving settlements that are entered into. So before anything can be done with a remand, it needs to potentially be approved. Again, not the settlement, but the remand has to be approved by the city council. And so this title is requesting the city council just to approve a joint request to the land court. The land court is the entity that actually remands the case back to the planning board. The city council does not have the power or the authority to remand it back on its own terms. The city council is only being asked to jointly ask the land court. We had asked the land court back in November to remand it back to the city council. The court entered an order at that time remanding it back to the city council on November 3rd, but that was subject to the city council vote, and the city council vote at that time did not approve the remand. And again, history-wise, we went back in front of the land court on December 8th, and the judge expressed extreme anger towards the city council and towards the city of Newburyport, stating that the city council was acting well beyond its authority, that they did not have the authority to weigh in on planning board decisions, that the city council role is to only ask for the remand, that the proper board to decide a land court issue, the proper zoning board to decide a land court issue would be the planning board, which would have the authority to do that, to act on that.
All right, thank you. Councilor Khan?
Yes, thank you, Council President. May I ask to Attorney Lane through the Council President? I just want to clarify that the authority in terms of remanding lies on the City Council to remand to the Planning Board, even though there was
No, the planning board, the city council could not vote anything back to the planning board. The city council can ask the land court, can jointly request the land court to remand it back to the planning board. The city council cannot on its own ask that the matter be sent back to the planning board. It's going to have to go back in front of the land court, and the land court is the only entity because it's an ongoing litigation. The litigation is not stopped, it's still proceeding forward. And so the only way it gets remanded is if the land court remands it back to the plan. We can jointly ask the land court to do that. The city council can, but they again cannot on its own remand it.
So okay, may I follow up then? Sure. Just to make sure I'm clear on this, because this is a little, I think, different than how I was understanding it before. So the order then is really going back to the land court. We're asking the land court to remand it there. So it's not coming through us to do it.
That's correct. That's correct.
So we're just sending it back to the land court.
And the land court judge has expressed his statement to council that clearly he thinks the things should be back in front of the planning board, should be remanded so the planning board can do its job to, again, as the body which has zoning background experience, to review the plans that are before it.
May I follow up, Council
Yes,
President?
Councilor
Just to be really clear here, because in November, for those of us who were here in 2021, it was a different expectation. And can you explain why it was a different?
Well, it was a different expectation because it was a different action in November. In November, the land court had already remanded it back. At the time, we were trying to work under a timetable to have it fully reviewed and done by the planning board by the end of the year. So in November, the land court had already entered the order of remand. But part of the clause of that order of remand allowed the city council to allow the remand or not to allow the remand.
Can you pause there?
Sure.
So what allowed that? What was the what allowed it for the council to remand it to the planning board? You said there was an order, it was in our order that in November?
No. The land court issued an order of remand. So on November 3rd, the land court issued an order of remand to remand the case back to the planning board, subject to the approval of the city council at that time.
So subject to the approval, that was from the land court judge? That they had said subject to the council approval. I guess I'm trying to understand what was.
And we had asked that to be the case. We had asked that as part of there was a joint motion filed to the land court to remand the case back to the planning board. But at that time, because of the timing, we had not had city council approval for a potential remand at that point. So that's why timing-wise, it was done sort of backwards. And the land court judge expressed that he said point blank that he would have never issued that order of remand if he thought the city council was going to control the remand, that it clearly was in his mind something that should be in front of the planning board, a zoning body, to review the plans that are before it.
And my apologies, I'm not standing up. Sorry, I should be standing up. But I'm just going to say this is very confusing because we were really under a different understanding in November. And for those of you here and those watching, that decision really was on us in terms of, I don't think there was an expectation it's coming back to you to just send along without, just unanimously to send it along. It was really positioned very differently. And so I just want to make sure, things have changed, parameters have changed, and I'm not quite sure what, I think I'm slowly understanding it, meaning now there's been some activity since November. Correct. And if I'm understanding correctly, the next step that we're being told now is that this is simply really going back to the land court. And that's the action as counselors is very different than November, and I think people need to hear that. So that's a big change, and I know I appreciate that. I'm still a little bit, unclear since I was not there as part of that kind of conversation. Yes. This is what we're being told, and I'm trying to understand how that works, and I'm not privy to the level you guys are. But I do want to say this is a very different expectation than what we talked about in November, and so thank you for your patience and helping me piece out the changes. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So Councilor Vogel and then Councilor Lang.
Thank you, Council President. This is starting to sound like a yes is a no and a no is a yes. And I just want to make sure that we are clear here. So a yes vote sends the message, if you will, back to the land court, more or less an okay to the land court to go ahead and remand it back to the planning board. Is that fairly accurate?
That's correct.
Okay. So that's a yes. We're telling the land court, go ahead, send it back to them. Okay, so it's a roundabout way, it's a roundabout way of getting it back to the planning board. A no vote on this says to the land court, the decision of the planning board stands in our mind. Is that an accurate description? Our planning board. Okay.
I understand what you're saying. It's not directly saying that. It's not that the decision stands. It's that we're not agreeing for the planning board to do their job to review the settlement.
I love words. They make me smile.
I understand.
So a no vote, if we vote no on sending this back to the land court, the planning board's decision as it stands today more or less stands in terms of the eyes of the land court, and then the litigation goes forward from there. Is that accurate?
And it's somewhat accurate, but I just don't want to mislead. The litigation is proceeding forward now. The litigation is still actively with the land court. It's not in limbo right now, and there is things moving forward, potentially motions that would be filed, and so I don't want to say that it would send it back to the land court. It's at the land court now.
It's at the land court.
And what the question is, are we going to ask the land court, or is the city council going to authorize the city solicitor to jointly ask with the bank's counsel to remand the case back to the planning board? That would pull it away from the land court again and allow the planning board to review it.
Okay.
If that's a no vote, would just say the litigation is going to proceed, and there would be motions being filed challenging the DOD district.
Based on the challenging the planning board's decision, essentially.
Challenging the DOD district. The
Okay.
court has separated
Yes.
the
Okay,
litigation, and
that's-
the court has said that they want to rule on the third prong of the complaint first, which challenges the DOD district. They're asking to make a legal determination, and the Attorney General has been put on notice that the whole DOD district is being challenged.
Understood. Thank you. Thank you.
Councilor Lane.
Yeah, I'm going to make a motion to receive and file this proposed amendment and Order 332 collectively.
Is there a second? All right. Are there further questions? So I think what we have on the floor right now is the motion to approve the amendment that you have on your desk right now. If there are no other questions, all those in favor of approving the amendment, say aye. 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 All those opposed, say nay.
Nay.
All right. Sounds like one no. All right. Further discussion. Councilor Khan.
Yeah, thank you, Council President. I guess another clarification, when I say in order to jointly request, I guess I'm trying to understand the jointly part. Is that, sorry, Attorney Lane?
This language was reviewed by KP Law, so I'll let Attorney Lane.
So the jointly means you're doing it with some other entity. So I guess I'm just trying to get clarity.
We're doing with the bank, the plaintiff, and the litigation. It has to be a joint request to remand with the land court. So it would be a joint.
The city and the institution for
The
savings.
plaintiff in the litigation, the bank, and the city, which is the defendant, the planning board, which is the defendant in the litigation. So a joint request would be a joint motion to remand the case back.
And then also, would this just take a simple majority to pass?
With the city council, yes, but it would not, with the planning board, it would still be reviewing. A remand would still go back, and the planning board would still need a supermajority.
Which is 6 of 9, is that?
That's correct.
Let me make sure. The other thing, I guess, moving along with my other counselor at large's point about our decision tonight, it seems like we are basically, I feel like there's no options really, is what it sounds like. I mean, I'm trying to understand this specific action and why it's even necessary to some extent. I think this is an interesting situation, and I'm not sure if this is typically how things like this are handled, but it just, to me, it seems like they're really, it's just courtesy. It's what it's sounding like.
I understand, and it is somewhat different because the city charter is different, and that's part of what the land court judge expressed to us, that he's not aware of any other communities in the Commonwealth that would allow an elected body to control something getting back to a planning or zoning board. And that's what he stated in open court during the hearing to us. And that it is somewhat different, but again, the city's charter, and he threatened in that hearing to do it on his own. He said, I might just do this all on my own, but I don't want to compel further litigation and have this go up to the appeals court. So he did make the threat in open court to the parties.
So this is a charter issue of ours that is why this is resulting.
It's a charter issue only in the sense that, again, the city's charter has the right to again, to potentially approve settlement. And I don't want to get into the whole charter for what that, because that's another issue.
Yes. All right. Thank you.
Is there, Councilor Donahue?
Thank you, Council President. I just wanted to add my sort of, where I stand with this and my 2 cents as ward councilor for the many residents who you've heard from over the past few weeks via many, many, many emails, and all of those who you heard speak tonight. I do want to point out, that we are being asked to do something that was already done. The planning board did already make a decision, and I'm not sure why we would ask them to reconsider or reevaluate or reassess or any of that with a new body of members who are not privy to all of the conversations and all the 14 months of work that was done. And I do agree with many of the sentiments that asking them to redo their work is undermining the work that was done, and may very well leave a bitter taste in many volunteers' mouths. So that being said, and really for all the reasons you heard tonight from the residents and abutters of the IFS, I would ask you to vote no on this settlement and just have it play out in land court as it already is, without having it go back to a newly formed planning board that really isn't, I think, in the appropriate position to revisit this with only 2 meetings. So again, I urge you all to vote this down. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Donahue. Is there, Councilor Lane?
I greatly agree with what the Ward 2 councilor just said. I feel like we're out of our lane here. That was my purpose of receiving and filing this. This is not our decision to make. There is litigation. It should go forward. I don't see why we're pumping the brakes now, or what has changed, that we would send this back to the planning board. It undermines that board and all the work they've put into this so far. I'll yield for now.
Thank you, Councilor. Is there a motion on the,
We should have a motion.
There isn't, or it's not?
is there a,
There is not, as I had it, there was a motion to amend.
So
And
we need a motion to
approve is amend with the in order.
Okay, motion to approve with the amendment.
I thought we did that.
We didn't. We missed. But that's okay. We had debate before the motion.
So we need a
I'll second that.
thank you.
all right, so the motion on the floor is to approve
As amended.
as amended. Further discussion, Councilor McCauley?
Thank you, Council President. In November, I understood what was being asked of us, and I supported, because we had to support, the arbitration that both sides went to. And that plan that came out of arbitration never actually went to the planning board. It actually went nowhere. It went back to court. The court officer and judge in this case remanded it to the planning board, and we invoked our right to say, no, I think we're done. But every time we take these steps, there's consequences. There's consequences on every step that the city takes. That's cost, that's time, that's resources. I said in November, I empathize with the abutters. I said in November that whatever the planning board decided based upon their re-review of the plan that came out of the arbitration, I would fully support. I think I'm going to stick with that. I'm going to vote yes on this. I'm going to ask that the planning board review the proposal as set forth from the arbitration. And I have no ask of them yes or no. I would like them to come up with the answer that they want to come up with, and I will fully support whatever answer they come up with. And that comes with consequences on both sides. So thank you. I yield.
Thank you, Councilor McCauley. Further discussion? Councilor Preston.
Yes, thank you. I want to say for the record that I agree with the abutters. I feel like the project is too large for the neighborhood, and I wish so very much that the bank would have worked more closely with the neighborhood. I feel like they've done a disservice to the neighborhood and frankly the whole community. I think a lot of this could have been avoided. But having said that, the planning board really is the body that is tasked with issuing special permits. They are appointed because they have land use expertise and zoning expertise. And I think for that reason, they really should be the body that makes the decision on the settlement. I empathize for the abutters. I know that this is very hard, and you really don't want to take the risk of the planning board saying yes to the project. I really do understand that. And I really do respect the work that has been done by the planning board, as well as the Historic Commission, and frankly, all of the groups that have spoken out about this. But at the end of the day, this is about either doing what the abutters want or what I feel is right for the city. And ultimately, I'm going to make the decision to say yes for this because I feel like it's the right decision for the city and it puts us in the best position moving forward. Thank you.
Councilor Cameron, you had your hand up.
Thank you, President. Yeah, I'm going to vote in favor of this, and not an easy one, and sort of where I'm coming from in the kind of the circle of people and constituencies that I'm most in favor of supporting. The abutters to any project are always going to have extra sway in my mind. The citizens of Newburyport, the businesses of Newburyport, our own volunteer boards and commissions, and I may be one of the few members of this council to have served on a volunteer commission who has been sued for a decision made by the ZBA. And Attorney Mead was very involved in that. So I know how it feels. I also know that in many years of being on the council and now back again in the 2 years on the ZBA, things don't pan out the way that you want to. I've reviewed the record of the planning board, and the abutters attended so many of those meetings, and the Institution for Savings and their attorneys and supporters attended many of those. I mean, really difficult, challenging issues and conversations, and I know abutters feel like changes weren't made, and the bank feels that changes were made and accommodations were tried to be reached. It's hard for any of us to really weigh in on that. So I think having it go back to the planning board is respectful of their authority. If they continue, with what they originally decided, then I say we ride it into court. There is a threat to the DOD, and somebody I look to who's not on the council any longer, former Councilor Eigerman, was one of the settlers in this agreement, and he being in favor of it speaks a lot to me because I know he fought very hard for the downtown overlay district and all that does for our community. I will add that settlement agreement was signed by, and negotiated over that day and a half. Council President Shand, who's now president, Councilor Eigerman, who was then president, Mayor Holliday, which is why Mayor Reardon gets off the hook here, I suppose, and also signed by 2 planning board members. So Chair Sontag, who's still on the planning board, and MJ Verdi, who's no longer. So I feel like the planning board was involved in that. Whether the changes in that settlement agreement are significant enough for the abutters, they've said that they don't consider it much of a change. And again, I can't really speak to that, so I think having this process-wise go back to the planning board, I think makes the most sense. Again, cities, municipalities get sued all the time, and if it does come to that down the road, I'll certainly be supporting whatever the planning board says. I appreciate what our own council has said about the judge's opinion on this, and I think this is the way to go. It's hard, but I think it is the best thing to do.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Councilor Cameron. Further comments from councilors? I see Councilor Vogel. Before I go to you, is there anyone else who hasn't spoken who wants to speak? All right, Councilor Vogel.
Thank you. If I may, through the President. So I stand opposed to sending this back to the Planning Board. I think the Planning Board has been expressed by the abutters worked diligently, and the abutters worked diligently. I look at the plan. I think the plan, not that I have any sense of making a judgment on it, but personally, I don't see any change to the plan. It doesn't appear to me as though there was much effort from the bank, blah, 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 blah. I do believe that to the statement that was made by, I believe, one of the speakers, I won't mention his name, but you'll know who it is. It's true. If we send this back to the planning board is going to feel as though we want them to approve it. And that's too bad. The fact that the judge is challenging our charter by saying, I've never seen this, I don't like it, I'm going to take it upon myself. Well, for crying out loud, sorry. This is our ballywick. We're allowed to say no. We don't want it to go back to the planning board, work it out. So that's where I stand. We'll see how the votes go. Thank you.
Councilor Wright.
Madam President, as a new member of the council, I have made myself familiar with everything that's gone on. I followed it closely in the newspaper as much as you can rely on that. I'm very process oriented, and if you agree to enter into mediation, that decision has weight and deserves to be recognized. So because we agreed to do that, we need to take this back to the planning board. That was part of entering into mediation. So I believe the planning board has the ability and the tools to come up with what they believe is the correct decision. It may very likely be the same decision, but that is their responsibility and their authority is to do that. And I will join my other colleagues who have said that whatever the planning board decides, we are not sending them any kind of message in saying yes tonight. We are just completing the process that was initiated when we agreed to go to mediation.
Thank you, Councilor Wright. Councilor Preston?
Yes, thank you. Actually, my fellow counselor at large brings up a really great point, as well as Mr. Griffin. And I want to stand and say I actually asked for an amendment from the previous order, because the previous order actually did say recommends and accepts. And I felt very strongly that that was too directional to the planning board. So I want to stand and say very clearly and very loudly, I do not expect any direction from the planning board. I want the planning board to make this decision on their own merits. Again, they are the people that have expertise in land use and in zoning, and they are the best equipped to make the decision about whether or not this settlement is fair. But please hear us that we want the planning board to make that decision for themselves. Thank you.
Councilor Khan.
Yeah, thank you, Council President. You know, and kind of going back through the activities that we went through when this was first brought before us last year, is that when it came in October, we did send it to General Government Committee, and there was conversation in committee as well. So we were able to publicly show the, I guess, the compromise, or what the kind of what the mediation resulted in. And you know, at that time, that was kind of the information we went from. I think the way this is kind of ordered and the amendment made in terms of that direction ultimately doesn't change, I think, what we had gone through. So I also know that publicly we've been able to see it, compare with what we had heard, those who were following what the planning board was advising. And at the same time, the planning board members had still vocally had informed what the issues were and what the result that ended up in general government looked like. There was no significant, I mean, not that I'm saying we're making that decision, we're not, in terms of looking at the plans and saying, here's what we think about it. But in that general government conversation, there was, there was a discussion about those plans and what was ultimately kind of modified. And I remember walking through that, like, here's what were done at the corner tops, and because we were curious to know what was done. So with that vote, I had voted no back then, and I will not change that vote. I will still stay at no. And I do appreciate the clarification, but I do stand with what I've been following from the inception of this project. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Khan. Further discussion? Councilor Lane.
I'm also a no on this. And with what the councilor at large just said, we went through the mediation once. It came down to very minimal things, at which point the bank did not budge upon. I would urge you all to reconsider and vote no on this and let due process take place. We've already seen what the mediation looks like. The bank has not been good neighbors in my mind, and that's why I'm going to vote no. And I'm urging you to do the same. Let the process take its course.
Further discussion? All right, without seeing any hands, how about a roll call vote?
So roll call on the motion to approve is amended. Councilor Preston?
Yes.
Councilor Vogel?
No.
Councilor Wallace?
Yes. Yes.
Yes. Thank you. Councilor Wright?
Yes.
Councilor Zede?
Yes.
Councilor Cameron?
Yes.
Councilor Donahue?
No.
Councilor Khan?
No.
Councilor Lane?
No.
Councilor McCauley?
Yes.
Councilor Shan?
Yes.
Motion passes.
All right. Clerk Jones, would you like to continue?
I would love to continue.
Did you put feet on these chairs?
No, but they were put on. Don't take it personal. So next up, I believe, is the mayor's update.
Motion to receive and file.
All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? All right. First reading appointments.
There are none.
Communications.
We have the late file communication 406, which is the Pioneer League letter regarding pickleball.
Motion to refer to Neighborhood and City Services.
Second.
Is there a second?
Yes?
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Move to Neighborhood and City Services.
Yeah.
All right.
Next, we have the transfer 124 removed by Councilor Vogel.
Motion to refer to Budget and Finance and Committee of the Whole.
Second.
It's fine.
Councilor Vogel?
Just to, this is terrible, these chairs. I just wish it to go to the Committee of the Whole so that we all have the opportunity to speak at that meeting is all. Thank you.
All right. All those in favor of
Money
making,
for
sending that to Budget and Finance and,
Point of order, I didn't hear, what order are we talking about?
Transfer.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
30,000 municipal buildings to Youth Services Center schematic design.
all right, does everybody know what we're voting on now? Okay. All those in favor of sending this to Budget and Finance and Committee of the Whole, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right. Moving right along.
We're, right now, we are at orders. There are no second reading. We have Order 338, which is the CIP program FY 2023.
Motion to refer to Budget and Finance and Committee of the Whole.
Second.
Discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right.
Next, we have the Order 339, which is an order authorizing an agreement to lease the parking lot at the Daily News.
Motion to refer to Public Safety.
Second.
Discussion? All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right.
Next, we have Order 340, which is the Fair Share Resolution.
Motion to refer to General Government.
Second.
Discussion? Councilor Shazid?
Yeah, I'm going to oppose this. I spent some time, again, reading what the committees do, and I don't understand how we received and filed some communications a couple weeks ago, but we're going to take on something that's at the state level that we really have no jurisdiction over. General government, you can read it in the ordinance, doesn't have jurisdiction over this, so I'm going to send it. I'd rather receive and file it. Thank you.
Councilor Cameron?
Thank you, President. So this, I think, does have relevancy at the local level. A lot of municipalities are going to be looking at resolutions around this particular issue. This is going to be on the state ballot for all voters in November. It's taken many years for it to get this far. This was going to be passed, something similar by the legislature a couple of years ago. The state Supreme Judicial Court ruled that all voters needed to vote on it. I'm simply looking to help educate voters and hopefully have the council support this. Mayor Reardon, who expressed support earlier in his comments, he signed a pledge. In the summer, there was an event at the Bartlett Mall about it, and we heard from three citizens speaking about it. It does mean potentially more money and resources for the city of Newburyport, whether that's through our own government or through other state spending. So I think it is germane to what we're trying to do. Speak specifically to to streets and sidewalks and transportation and education, whether it's general government, and I know narrowly applied, general government, that name isn't really described by what's in the ordinances. Budget and finance talks about revenue. I'm not sure this is actually ever going to be city revenue, so I would like to see a committee review it. I'm not looking for this to be a DEFCON 5 situation, but have a meeting on it and let the council vote on it. Thank you.
Councilor Lang.
I have a question on it as well. Is this, in terms of the purpose, if this is going to go to a vote, I don't want to endorse this as what we support as a city and influence a vote in the future. Is that what we're doing here? I mean, I want some clarification on why we're doing this at this level.
Councilor Cameron?
Yeah, if you don't want to support it, then you would vote no. But yes, it would be a resolution that would at least educate Newburyport voters, who of course are going to make their own decision, that the city council is in favor of this or not in favor of it. So.
Councilor Zede.
Thank you. I just want to do two things. One is I want to read into the record Section 232, which is the responsibilities of the Committee on General Government. The committee shall be concerned with the supervision of city properties whose custody has not been assigned to a specific municipal department, and the following departments: city clerk, city solicitor, registrar of voters, information technology and human resources, as well as council chambers. I don't see any relevancy there. I also think that there's another thing to be concerned about here, and that is that there is a prohibition of using public resources to influence ballot questions. Some who were on with us during the marijuana debate will recall that. So that's a little bit concerning as well if the intent is to imply or signal support on behalf of the city council, which is a public body as well. I'm sorry, I'm missing something over there, but thank you. And I've said all I want to say. Thank you.
All right. Well, the motion on the floor is to refer this to general government.
It is.
Do you want to take a roll call vote on this?
A roll call to refer to general government. Is it committee of the whole or just general government?
Could make it committee of the whole.
General government and committee of the whole.
I'll second that again.
Well, consider it a friendly amendment.
Yep.
Okay, so roll call on that motion to refer. Councilor Preston?
Yes.
Councilor Vogel?
Yes.
Councilor Wallace?
Yes.
Councilor Wright?
No.
Councilor Zede?
No.
Councilor Cameron?
Yes.
Councilor Donahue?
Yes.
Councilor Khan?
Yes.
Councilor Lane?
No.
Councilor McCauley?
No.
Councilor Shan?
Yes.
Motion passes 7-4.
Order.
So that leads us, President, to late file Blue Wave Solar pilot negotiation.
Motion to refer to planning and development.
Second.
Discussion? All those in favor of sending it to planning and development, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? To planning and development it goes. All right.
Order 342, which is the late file with respect to supplementary Bartlett Mall
Motion
Historic.
to refer to budget and finance.
Thank you.
Second.
Discussion? All those in favor, say aye.
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 Those opposed? All right. Do we have any others?
That leads us to Ordinance 106, second reading.
Motion to approve on second reading.
Second.
Roll call.
Motion to approve second reading, Ordinance 106. Councilor Preston?
Yes.
Councilor Vogel?
Yes.
Councilor Wallace?
Yes.
Councilor Wright?
Yes.
Councilor Zede?
Yes.
Councilor Cameron?
Yes.
Councilor Donahue?
Yes.
Councilor Khan?
Yes.
Councilor Lane?
Yes.
Councilor McCauley?
Yes.
And Councilor Shan?
Yes.
Thank you.
All right, committee items. So the first one on the list is the ad hoc on Market Landing Park, Order 326. So it's out, so I guess the motion is to,
Motion to approve?
Second.
All right, discussion. So just, Councilman Macaulay.
Thank you, Council President. We've already paid for this, so it's time for us to continue to move forward. We've gone through some hiccups in design. I think they're behind us, and it's now time for us to move forward to get some plans so that we can actually do this. Thank you.
Agreed. Discussion. Councilor Zeid.
Go ahead.
The committee, just to fill in this part, did meet about this, and it was 4-1, and I was the one dissent, and I just wanted to explain why I dissented in committee and why I'll dissent tonight. Can't claim the same level of experience as some folks who have been involved in the waterfront for decades or longer, but I have been on it for about 4 or 5 years now. And I'm really proud of a lot of the work that's been done. I think we've paved a lot of paths that were quite rocky at times. So I'm very happy to have been part of that. But when I reflect on that, what I think about is we were most effective and most successful when we were most deliberate. And so what my concern is here is, we had a number of issues that were identified, but probably the biggest one was the cost. I mean, in terms of having a path forward to actually build this, and I still don't see how that's clear. And the design discussion in committee went around and around, and it felt a bit like we were just chopping bathrooms off the end at some point in the hope that would maybe bring the cost into something more reasonable. But to this, the only number I have so far is about 1.6 million. That's the number that's been thrown around. But that's about a 3-year-old estimate. So I don't want to throw money away if we don't know we have a path to build it. So my sense is that with a little bit more thought, we could get Sasaki to produce for us a cost estimate. We're going to have a major bond in front of us out of CPA likely in the coming month or so, if you've been following that process. But even that isn't sufficient to build the rest of the park. So I've heard everything from, we're just designing this now, but it could be 5 to 10 years before we have a chance to build it, which doesn't solve the immediate problem actually of needing restrooms on the waterfront to the extent that we do need them, and to the extent that the existing bathroom inventory we have doesn't support it. So I'm not, I guess, sensing quite the urgency maybe that some are, and I was an original sponsor of the order to fund this, thinking that it would give us a path to have these conversations before we engage Sasaki, but that didn't work out in December. So a little bit of a haphazard thing to me, and I think a little bit more thought and some funding would really help us put this into something that we can actually build, rather than the plan that we get and ultimately ends up living its life on a shelf, probably expiring in usefulness and validity because of reg changes and things that occur, and just as naturally things evolve. So that's why I'll be voting no tonight. Thank you.
Councilor Lang.
I'm also going to vote no, and I actually brought in a little visual aid on my way in. So this is a piece of brick that was broken in front of City Hall. I'm done spending money on the waterfront when we haven't taken care of our residents. This is just continuing to throw money at something that is a nice to have rather than a need to have. So I'm voting no. I'll leave my visual aid there, and I yield for now.
All right, further discussion? Councilor Wright.
Thank you, Council President. For me, it's there's some unanswered questions on priorities. I can't in good conscience go forward with a recommendation to spend more money on design for a park that is predicated to be built in that location when we haven't come up with any plan or any dollars to fix the embankment. And so we're going to spend $1 million-ish on design plans, but we don't have the money fully funded yet to fix the infrastructure that the park's going to be built on. It doesn't make sense to me to do that. There's no point in that money that we spend or approve tonight for Sasaki could go towards fixing the gap or filling the gap, no pun intended, to repair the bulkhead. And so I agree with Ward Councillor from Ward 1 that I think we could spend more time evaluating this. I don't see the rush to get to a shovel-ready project when there's a lot of unanswered questions. We have trouble keeping the restrooms that we have now open year-round. Plum Island restrooms are closed. The restrooms here are closed. The restrooms at the garage are uncertain whether they're open. The Harbour Master restrooms are closed. I just don't think we've given this enough consideration in our listing of priorities. So thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Wright. All right, any further discussion? All right, all those in favor of proceeding with approving Order 326, which will take us to a 75% design of the Sasaki Park, Market Landing Park. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Nay.
Nay.
So may I poll, so we have Councilor Lane as a no, Councilor Dunny, are you a no?
I was a no, yes.
Councilor Wright's a no, Councilor Z's a no. 4, correct? Okay. Motion passes. As far as I know, it needs 6.
Thank you. All right, Budget and Finance.
Thank you. I would like to start by making a motion to approve order number 333 as it was amended in committee.
Second.
Thank you. So this is a CPC application filed jointly by the Newburyport Public Schools or the school district as well as the Parks Commission. Just to give you fill in some details, this is related to the tennis courts at the Knock Middle School. And it involves, the removal essentially of the existing courts and replacement of those courts while also changing the orientation of those courts, turning them 90 degrees. This project has origins that go back to the last CPC cycle. As you'll see in the amended order, at that time, $175,000 was appropriated towards this project. And in the intervening time, the RFP was sent out to the market in order to find some folks that could actually conduct this project and do it. And unfortunately, the bids came in at an amount that exceeded the $175,000. So that the crunch became on in order to try and find that amount of money, the gap. And so what occurred then is that a new application was filed with the CPC to fill that gap. That request was for $50,000, and that was the additional $40,000 needed plus a $10,000 option to do an adjoining or adjacent walkway in concrete. Upon making it through the CPC, they did reduce the recommendation to $40,000 before forwarding it to us. And the $40,000 would enable the completion of the project, and that adjacent walkway would be in asphalt instead of concrete. It's not a sidewalk like a street sidewalk. This is just an adjacent walkway to the courts. Then we discussed this in committee. Steve Bergholm is here, and he's going to fill in any gaps that I may miss and answer questions. But in that discussion, it was discovered that there was some capital funds left over from a previous project that has closed. That project has been completed, but orphaned about $10,705. So in committee, the amendment largely was to reduce the $40,000 by that amount and then attach a transfer. So this is funding the project now in total. It's just coming from two sources, an additional $29,295 from CPA, and $10,705 from the former loading dock project, which again, that project is closed, but the funds sort of went unused. And together that would be sufficient. That would make the total project $215,000. Because the bids are in now, we have price certainty. And the bids, the school department is ready to award that bid to the contractor that they picked, which I believe is called Vermont Courts or something like that, as the most qualified bidder at the best price. So this would complete. The schedule would be roughly to start the work this year, this summer, post-school, which is why this came in kind of as an out-of-band CPC application. I hope that provides enough details. I can try and answer, and Steve is here as well if I've missed anything. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Zede. Councilor Vogel?
Yes, thank you. If I may just direct a question. Can we take the things off the chair? The $10,000 that how does that move along? Is that a transfer, or is that just are they just able to use it because it's related? How does that work?
Right. The double underline below acts as a transfer order. So in committee, we discussed, okay, bring in a new transfer order, but then we'd have another cycle to complete. And so we worked with Director of Finance, Ethan Manning. He provided this language so that we could package this up and send them on their way.
Thank you.
But it is a transfer,
Thank
yes.
you.
Counselor Lane.
Just a question on it. I was wondering if the $40,000 allocated for pickleball at the Pioneer League was considered in this decision to transfer the $40,000 from that gift to use it here and put pickleball here.
Anyone answer that? Counselor Preston.
Yeah, I had actually asked the question about pickleball here. As I mentioned when we put this into committee, I had concerns about us spending money on single purpose. And what I was told was that the Friends of Newburyport Tennis, I guess is the name of the group, adamantly opposed having pickleball at this site.
First, we'll go to Counselor McCauley, then Counselor Lane.
Yeah, I'm going to support this, but reluctantly. I think it's no secret that I'm a literalist when it comes to the CPA kind of requirements. This is a school field. This is not a park. This is not a multi-use thing. This is a school field. And the previous administration used to get the school fields and all that and count them as parks and have parks on the application and push it through that way. So I'm trying to send a message to the CPA group that they can go back to being literalists again about looking at what the law actually states. This is a school field. It's going to be maintained by the school. Personally, I think that these funds should come out of the school budget and the school plans that go along here. Some can say we're splitting hairs, but this is CPA money that's coming out. It has a goal and an objective that's clearly laid out in the law, and I think we tweak that going forward. So again, because of the time frames on this, I will say yes to this on this application, but I'm just sharing my opinion on that. Thank you, I yield.
Thank you, Counselor McCauley. Counselor Lane, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I'm going to oppose this simply for the fact of the Pioneer League does not want pickleball either, and they're told too bad, so sad. I think we're rushing this. I think that if we're going to put a pickleball court in somewhere, this should be highly considered. Just because it doesn't, no is not a good answer to me, especially with the way it's panned out with the Pioneer League. So I'm going to be voting not in favor of this tonight.
Thank you, Counselor Lane. Counselor Cameron.
Thank you. I'll be voting in favor. I appreciate the very detailed explanation given by Councilor Zeid. I think that's helpful. There's a bunch of moving parts in here for what's a fairly simple thing. And I hear Councilor McCauley's argument around literalism and CPA funds. I do think there are certain projects that are definitely more on the school side. I mean, a football field, within the high school, I mean, that seems to me like a school project. Tennis courts, though, I mean, I think these are, if there's ever a lock on these, Steve, I'll come knocking at your door. We have very few tennis courts here. It's Atkinson and maybe one off of Beacon Street, the Perkins Park. And I think it's a sport that we should encourage. It's free, and unless you can afford to join the local tennis club, I mean, kids kind of miss out. I think the high school team plays at Atkinson Park, which is a bit of a schlep. And those are good courts. For sure, but I think just to have some resource there is great and covers that part of town, so thank you.
Further discussion? All right. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All those opposed?
No.
That'd be one no, thank you.
One no?
Next is a motion to approve order number 335, which is ARPA dated 3/28/22, 2.4 for streets and sidewalks.
Second.
Thank you. So first is just a quick correction. It's not 2.4K, it's 2.4M. $2,400 unfortunately doesn't go too far. All right, I'll try and condense this as much as possible to give you about 4 months plus of ARPA committee work, and with apologies to my committee members who've already heard this a little bit. But here's the long story short. The city of Newburyport was granted $5.4 million in ARPA funds in aggregate, which is a combination of our city allocation plus the county allocation, because Massachusetts really doesn't have counties anymore. They took that money and divvied it up over the communities in the county. So we started with 5.4. You remember that street, Phillips Drive, we appropriated $1 million towards that. So that leaves us with 4.4, and that's what the ARPA committee started with back in January when it sort of reconvened and started meeting again. So in order to sort of start to wrap our heads around what you could do with 4.4, first we sort of had some higher level discussions and came to the conclusion that we really wanted to stick with kind of the infrastructure theme. As you'll recall, there were certain restrictions placed on this money early on. It was infrastructure, but that there's a little bit more to it than that. There were roughly 4 buckets, like broadband, as well as water and sewer and sort of traditional infrastructure projects. And then there was this category called revenue replacement. And revenue replacement implied that the funds that you did not take in as a result of COVID, you could use this money to replenish and in that way be able to spend it on any lawful purpose. At the time, when it first came out, you had to do a calculation in order to prove out what your amount should be or could be under that portion or under that group, which is the most attractive because it's the least restricted. At that time, Finance Director Ethan Manning had done an analysis and roughly came up with roughly 1.6 to 7 was the answer. In the intervening time, the Treasury issued new guidance and said that actually, if you're not anything under 10, you're in the safe harbor. So it doesn't matter if it's 9.999, you don't have to show your numbers, show your math, it's all fine. It's kind of like taking the standard deduction on your taxes. You don't have to explain it, you can just do it. So we talked about that, and so we're at 4.4, so we're clearly underneath that 10. So we started back to infrastructure and talking about that, and we did come to the conclusion that we are facing such amount of infrastructure needs that we wanted to stay in that theme. So our attention, as you might expect, turned to DPS primarily, although they're not the only group that does infrastructure projects, such as things like the bulkhead that you wouldn't necessarily think of DPS for. And we really started with last year's CIP as kind of a foundational thing, and then they then went ahead and improved or added to that, adding what, say, maybe there were new projects, updating things, and so forth. Once we sort of had this master universe list of potential things, we started to find out that, wow, there are some really big numbers on this list. I'll give you a couple examples. I know the water supply was a big discussion, and there are several projects that relate to water, such as protecting the the Artichoke Reservoir from the river, which is a project around improving the dam. There's also this idea to be able to pump water directly from the Indian Hill Reservoir to the plant. So if you recall, there's Indian Hill, there's Artichoke, and then there's a plant. So right now it has to trickle through those. The reason I mention that is that those projects were looking like $15 to $20 million plus. So the 4.4 started to feel pretty small, pretty quick, if I may editorialize. So we started to look at projects that maybe could fit into that money and realized that there were some that could and some that couldn't. Some of those larger projects, there may be smaller aspects that maybe could fit in. So anyways, after a lengthy discussion, of course, streets and sidewalks is part of that discussion, and we started to come around to this idea that we could fund $2.4 million, which would represent 1.2 for the first year and 1.2 for the second year. You'd have roughly 500-something K from Chapter 90, which has been fairly static, and then roughly $200,000 to $300,000 from meals tax, and that, if you add it up, roughly adds up to your $2 million desirable number for streets and sidewalks. So that's where this number comes from, and I just wanted to fill you on the ARPA. I will not tell you that whole story again, but just there will be more ARPA stuff coming in. We still actually have an ARPA matter in committee related to an interconnect with Amesbury for water, so I'm not going to talk about that. So in committee, so as you remember, the process is the ARPA committee has to recommend, and that's what the ARPA committee did with agreement from the mayor. It gets submitted. It went to the Budget and Finance Committee. We did meet about it, and we talked. A lot of the discussion was really about what happened to the bond authorization? Where did that go? So I'm sure most folks remember that discussion. The bond authorization is still valid. It's still valid at $6 million, but the administration, by way of Andrew Levine, and basically said, we still have the bond auth and we appreciate it, but this would allow us to delay maybe utilizing that bond auth, and there are other projects that maybe we'll be able to use some of that bonding capacity. Then we also talked about the connection or nexus to the roadway plan, and I'm not going to step on that. That's later tonight in Neighborhood and City Services, but there is obviously a connection there in terms of trying to align the plan with the funding. And then finally, Councilor Wright also asked, is the bulkhead still under discussion? Because we talked about what else is going on with ARPA. So I think that you're going to hear more about potentially, right, things that are in the mix, at least as far as the committee is concerned, would be things like the bulkhead, things like design maybe for some of these larger projects that are too big to fit into here to fund, but maybe the design or the engineering work could fit into here. So that's one there as well. And then again, we had a couple of other projects that are in the mix, but there is sort of a sense that we don't have to spend it all right this second. We have until about 4 years, but we have to spend it. So there's a desire to put the money to good use, but at the same time not to go too fast. So anyways, after all the discussion we had about the 2.4, the committee does recommend to you, this is the Committee on Budget now I'm talking about, does recommend to you approval of this 3-0, and hopefully that gives something to start with. Thank you.
Councilor Wallace.
Thank you, President. I too was on the committee, and I fully support the investment into infrastructure, streets and sidewalks. I personally would feel more comfortable voting for 1.2 for the first year of our streets and sidewalks plan, and coming back and then voting for another 1.2 once we're a few months under our belt. We're going to be getting into the streets and sidewalks discussion a little bit later, but I think by going through some of these numbers and going through the roadway plan, it's pretty clear that we do have some substantial street and sidewalk needs. And I just want to put in a plug for this additional 1.7 ARPA money that may be out there in the future, that we really need to look at our priorities and look at traffic safety projects, places where children, people with special needs, elderly can just safely walk around their neighborhood. And we have this opportunity with this money, and for years we say Newburyport, our streets and sidewalks are such a mess, and we have this money. So I want to make sure that it's used efficiently, well prioritized. But again, I do believe that the 2.4 is absolutely a good idea for streets and sidewalks. It's just how we may want to split that money or condition that money. I would be open to suggestions. Thank you.
Councilor McCauley.
Thank you, Council President. I would like to see if the sponsors would be open to an amendment, and it really is along the lines of what Councilor Wallace had just said. I'd like to add a milestone in here along the way, and it's in the language it says 50% of said appropriation upon receipt, which would be right away, and the remaining 50% appropriation on receipt of the second tranche of the city's allotment, which we know will be down the road. And I'd like to add, as well as the submission to and receipt by the City Council of both the updated 5-year rolling street plan and the prior year's accounting. And this, in a way, would tie it to the conversations that have been ongoing with the administration and the Neighborhood and City Services Committee about tying the two of them together. It doesn't mean that the council would, in my approach to this, it doesn't mean the council would vote again. We just would, the release of this is the money would come in, the updated rolling plan, whatever year that would be, and then the prior year's submission, which is what we've kind of consistently been talking about with the administration, and it would automatically be released along the way. And I don't know if the sponsors would be open to that as an amendment.
Councilor Wallace.
Sure. Just in response, I would be open to that very much so. I think that's a fair compromise. And I do like the idea of the accounting. I think that's important. Also because with the ARPA funds, there are some strict guidelines on what you need to submit and where it's being tracked. So we want to make sure, not just for our own use, but for whatever we have to submit to the state or the feds, whatever, we have everything we need. But it also helps you learn where you can maybe have some more efficiencies in the future, because the idea is with streets and sidewalks, we want to keep getting better and better at this. And one thing I also want to point out is that by approving this money, this does not mean that we are voting on the plan that was discussed. Again, we'll talk about that later, but it was more of a, this is what the administration is proposing, this is the direction we're going, but we're not exactly approving that plan necessarily. That's the way I understand it. And actually, if you do look at the plan, they have different funding sources listed, so I'll stop with the plan, but I would accept that amendment.
Councilor Vogel.
Thank you, Council President. So I'm a little unclear. So first of all, my understanding, and perhaps correct me if I'm wrong, is that there's not a whole lot of accounting for this money in terms of to the feds or to the state. I mean, we can say what we want to do with it because we're well under the threshold that we have to report it. Is that accurate? May I ask directly?
Councilor Z?
Yeah.
I mean, yes, we are in the safe harbor, so we're not going to be questioned on how we spend the money, but I would defer to Ethan. I still think there are some reporting requirements, but that's sort of out of my
Maybe
bailiwick,
thank you. We'll get to that, if I may, just in 1 second. But I'm not 100% clear, and so that's why I stand and I wonder exactly what it is that you're asking. Are you saying that, I don't know, try it again. I'm not sure what you're suggesting, that you want an accounting of how we're spending the money, where we are in that before we let any more go. I'm not clear what you're trying to say. Thank you.
Councilor McCauley?
Thank you, Council President. No, that's not what I'm saying. So the discussions that have gone on with NCS regarding the street plan is that there's a rolling 5-year plan.
Right.
Okay? And that every year, that plan will be submitted to the City Council for its review. Okay? Not approval, it's review. And with that, accompanying that, will be an accounting of the previous year's work that was done. Work done in 2022 will show up in the fall, and we'll know what we did, how well we matched against that plan along the way.
Right.
So all I'm suggesting is that we be consistent with what we've kind of already agreed to in terms of the 5-year rolling plan and the previous year's accounting, that it will be submitted and the money's released. That's all I'm suggesting. There's no other approval. The milestone is on the administration to communicate with us what's going on, and then the money's, and as soon as they do that, the money's released. Assuming it's there, the money's released.
May I follow up?
Councilor Vogel?
Thank you. Well, I guess the question is that the money is released. So if this plan comes in and it's simply a reporting, and then we say, okay, you can have the next chunk, I mean, what difference does it make if we're going to release it if it's not an approval and a vote? I mean, I'm all for just kind of, I understand the concern and the objective of the understanding the rolling plan and what was accomplished and what you're looking forward to do next. I just don't understand why we want to entangle it and entangle the money if you're not going to necessarily approve it or not approve it, but that we're just going to say, okay, you can have the next chunk. Why the steps? I mean, we're committing this money to streets and sidewalks, essentially committing 2 years to streets and sidewalks. We've done $1 million to clean up the Ward 6 councilors area down there. We've got these projects. I just don't understand why the further engagement, and I don't get it. Thank you.
Councilor Z?
Thank you. Yeah, I'm okay with it. I mean, to me, it's really not that complicated because we already plan to get a 5-year rolling plan every year. And frankly, the accounting, we could request it at any time. I mean, it's within our purview to ask for information. So in contrast, I also don't see the big deal about putting it in. To me, it's 6 of one, half dozen of another. The broader conversation we keep sort of, triangulating around is like, where does the council fit into these things? And, the money is typically, that is our connection to things. And so money's coming in here, so I'm not surprised that councilors are asking. That's a story as old as dirt. So I mean, the language is very benign to me. If there's any concern about, okay, will the money not get released or something? I mean, it seems pretty obvious, only unless there's a catastrophic failure. I mean, we're expecting to get a 5-year plan. That's been agreed upon. And again, budget season's coming up. I mean, I usually funnel like 100 requests for all sorts of accounting for all sorts of different things. So to me, this is a pretty benign request. I'm totally fine with it personally. If it's not acceptable to all three of us, we can do it as a more formal amendment and vote on it. But in the spirit, I mean, the answer to your question is because we compromised, that's why. So we could, yes, we can get to this some other way, but this seems like a reasonable ask, and I'm fine with it personally. Just so you've heard from 2 of us, and I'm not sure if you can come along or not.
If I might, I think it's clearer to make a motion to amend.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, I will make a motion to amend, and the language will be inserted after city's SLFRF allocation, comma, as well as, comma, the submission to and receipt by the City Council of both the updated 5-year rolling street and sidewalk plan, and the prior year's accounting.
That's wonderful. And if it passes, you'll be happy to send me that, I trust.
Sure.
Second.
So that's first and second on the motion to amend. Thank you.
Okay, discussion. So Councilor Preston and Councilor Wallace.
Yes, through the chair, if I could ask Mr. Levine, is there impact on how the administration will put together the rolling plan? Can you speak to that?
Happy to. So I think overall, this is something that's mostly consistent with what we were planning on doing anyway, and that the plan will be updated every year, and that accounting, that going over which roads and sidewalks were done in the year before would be released to the public and to the council. It's mostly consistent with what we were planning to do. I think there's some question in when the timeline would take place. Perhaps we need more time than would be asked for, but I think it's something that we could figure out. This is something that we want to be open about, is what roads and sidewalks were accomplished in the plan from year to year, and updating that plan using the petition process and everything else is important to us. So it's mostly consistent with what we were talking about.
Councilor Wallace and then Councilor Khan.
Yeah, just an example. The reason that I like this is just so I can tell my ward, because some of us have fielded a lot of emails and phone calls and very concerned citizens, and from what I understand, we aren't locked into the plan. So there might be some things that are still happening in year 2. And I know that they're still working on their petitions, and there's going to be another public meeting. So even though we pretty much know what's going to be in there, it's not definitive. So I feel like the first year is pretty well locked in. This just gives us a little buffer, and it's a little easier for me to go back to constituents and say, I hear you, we're working on it, and there'll be notification or whatever. I can help them with that. So that's all. Thanks.
Okay. Further discussion? All right, do we want to vote on the amendment?
On the motion to amend, roll call, or you can do a voice vote?
We can do a voice vote. All those in favor of the amendment, say aye. Aye. All those opposed?
No.
Well, no, thank you.
So that was the amendment. So now the overall. Any other discussion? All those in favor of the overall order, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? All right.
Approved as amended, 11-0.
So just to close out budget and finance, we will have a meeting. Our standing meeting will be this coming Thursday. We'll pick up on a couple of the other ARPA projects that we had, pending some invitees who may not be able to make it. I'm still working on that. But really the biggest thing I want to say is that now you are in receipt of the CIP more formally. And so you already have the schedule for that. Unfortunately, there might have to be a move here or there, but I'm trying to keep it just to the agenda for the night, not the date, so that we can stay with the dates that we have. But what I'd like to ask is, if you'd like, you're not obviously required to, but if you want to send me any questions you want sent to any department heads about any capital projects that you want to question, you're welcome to send them to me, and I will send them to I will coordinate, because I'm going to invite everybody, etc. I've already been working with Andrew and Ethan on the workshops to make sure all the department heads can attend. Again, you're not obligated to. You can go ask your questions any way you wish, but it's helpful, and it makes it easier, because some others may have the same question, and it just gets to be a little bit crazy. So again, as mentioned, when we first came in, the CIP will have a little bit of a delay, because we're trying to line it up as best we can with budget, so we're respectful of everybody's time. But I want to encourage you to start looking at it if you can, and just send any questions you have. We'll get them rolling. So thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Reed. Councilor Khan, Education.
Yeah, thank you, Council President. The Education Committee met last week on April 5th. We meet the day after the school committee meeting, which was on April 4th. They do, I think it's just important to update folks on their budget process. So there's been now 3 meetings on the budget. The first one was to talk about level services. The second one about aspirational kind of projections. And then the last one was like a public hearing, of which unfortunately nobody was there, which is too bad. But the process is not done, so I encourage everyone, the April 4th meeting is actually a really good one to go to the public calendar and to look at the budget that's there right now. They are working on having a similar structure to how we see it, the city council, the budget. So there's been a lot of efforts in having it a little bit more user-friendly, and I have to really commend the effort of the school, the central office folks in really working hard on that. Just to give folks an idea, just to be at level services, the projection's 3.1% from the city side in increase. And for the aspirational, which is what was presented in March, it's around 5.9%. That does not take into account the union contracts that they're negotiating right now, the teachers' contracts. So there's been speculation it could be 1% per year. So keep in mind that that number is going to be possibly higher. But the next phase in what's happening that the superintendent shared is that there's going to be now that discussion within the leadership at the different schools before they come up with the final budget. There is going to be on August 26th is when the final budget is April 26th. On April 26th, that's going to be when the final budget is due, and it gets voted that night by the school committee. So in our education committee, the school committee members expressed a desire to not vote on it that night. They want to see it in advance. So they are working to see that there will be an interim kind of meeting where that could be presented so that they could ask their questions. They could have some additional time on it than as opposed to approving it on April 26th. I also want to share that the Ward 5 counselor sent some really good questions to us to kind of engage and have central office address and have the superintendent. I meant to actually have the questions with the answers, and my apologies, I did not get that in the packet. But I think as we, my intention is to kind of put that together, so I will put that in as a communication. So when it comes budget time, I thought there were some really good questions that were asked, and I'm not going to go through it and for everyone's benefit right now, but I will make sure that there's a communication so folks could see that in that conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Khan. All right, general government. So we'll start with an easy one. Motion to receive and file communication 401. These are the letters from the IFS settlement.
Second.
Thank you. So yeah, the committee voted tonight 3-0 to receive and file all these. So if there's any further discussion, all those in favor to receive and file say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
10-1. All right. Motion to approve as amended Order 337, settlement for High Street paving, $150K.
Second.
All right. I'll let Councilor Z take it since he has the amendment language.
Yeah, the amendment that we discussed in committee is an addition that basically says said funds shall be placed into a receipts reserve for appropriation fund subject to future appropriation by the mayor and with approval of the city council.
Perfect.
And just the reason for that is we talked about in committee where was the money going to go, and Director of Finance Ethan Manning, and with the help of Andrew Levine, provided this language which is pretty typical for settlements, and that way we don't lose it into sort of other funds and so forth, and that the intent is, of my understanding, is that this will go back to High Street, which I think would be a rational thing to do, and with further discussion on just how far we can make that money go. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Z, for the further clarification. And just so everyone's aware, this is the $150,000 that we don't think we're going to get any more of, and we've all said that going any further with deliberation with High Street safety is going to get us anywhere. So anyway, with that, all those in favor of approving the Order 337, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? All right. Last but not least, Order 324, motion to approve the ad hoc on adaptive reuse of the Brown School as amended in committee.
Second.
I did put in some of the amendments that were requested by Councilor McCauley, specifically making sure that we weren't putting the committee into a hole. Was actually giving them the opportunity to do more than just, let's go to the actual language. 1 second. Right, the amendment language was 4A, where adaptive reuse for housing or other use deemed appropriate by the ad hoc administration. That keeps a rather broad opportunity for the use of the school. So, and I did change the dates as well to push it out some more, to give folks the opportunity to get the work done. So with that being said, discussion? Councilman Cameron?
Thank you, President. Yeah, just a couple of comments. So, you know, there's lots of ways that we decide things as a body, and sometimes it's very piecemeal and choppy, and it sometimes seems circular. We'll be voting on something, and some of us we want to wait until something else gets settled. And this ad hoc, I think the concept of this is to, you know, to an earlier use of words by Councillor Zeid regarding the waterfront. This is to help find the pathways and smooth out the rocky parts. This isn't, you know, meant to, you know, change the zoning. It's not meant to demolish the gym or keep the gym. It's to provide the process where that can all get settled out, rather than us doing piecemeal, transferring this into that. And that's really all it is. I mean, I think there was an original thought just to have this be a smaller body. And I know in a conversation with another councilor, the thought was to make this a little bit broader, to get more input that is more reflective of the full council and not just 3 members. And I think having the mayor's office and planning department and a couple of members of the Affordable Housing Trust along, you know, help figure out what it's going to be. And again, I think there's a general, you know, this is kind of in some ways like the Kelly School or the waterfront. I mean, around, it's like youth services and the waterfront. Some of these big things that if we don't kind of, you know, figure out the pathways and the process, then we're going to be spinning. You know, this will be painful, but I think it'd be a lot more painful to do it piecemeal. So I think this really, that's the intent, and think, you know, I'm going into it with an open mind on a whole lot of these questions, and I think it can be effective. Thank you.
Councilor Lang?
Just to clarify, this is just to look into reuse of the gym, right?
I think if you read the whole order, it's...
Be the whole property. The school and the gym.
Councilor Zeid?
Thank you. I'd like to just make a few suggested amendments and see if they have any legs, and then make some general comments. So my first one would be a motion to strike the mention of NYS throughout the document. So there are a few places where the NYS acronym appears. You can go through all of them, but in number 2, number 3, and so I'll wait and see if I get a second, and then I can speak to it. Okay. Number 2 would be to strike 4A, which is the
Point of order, I'm sorry.
I did not receive a second, so I was just moving on.
I misunderstood what you were saying.
Okay.
So you start again, please.
Yeah, then my motion was to strike NYS in number 2 and number 3, for example, where it says comma NYS comma in the list of potential constituencies for those 2 items.
Mr. President.
Yes.
So you want a second before you would have us understand why?
Sure.
Okay.
Or I mean, that's typical.
Well, I'll second that. I'm curious as to why.
Yeah, I mean, basically, I am trying to test the limits here a little bit, to be honest. And it seems like, you know, everybody wants to have it every way. And that's been really frustrating for me. And no matter how much bullying I take in committee or elsewhere, I'm not going to stop, because this is my ward, this is my responsibility. Is NYS have anything to do with the Brown School or not? So the answer is yes, no, and maybe, depending on the day and depending on the issue. So when we talked about it in committee, I used the word divorce. I believe separation was also used, which was maybe one of the few points of levity in the entire meeting. But I thought, why not? That's an area at least that we got some smiles on. So is the divorce happened or not? So I have opinions about the Brown School and NYS. I felt for some time now that I am in the minority, both on this council and the previous. But it'd be nice if this started from where the last process left off, instead of rewinding the tape and starting all over. So is NYS done at the Brown School? This is one small way to say, yeah, that decision has been made. And if that's the answer, then great. Why do we have to meet with them? I've met with all of the people on this list dozens of times. Some of us on this have met dozens of times. So yeah, I'm pushing the limit a little bit to force us to talk about this. That's my reason. I appreciate the second. Maybe you regret it now, and if you want to take it back, I certainly won't complain. But I just, I'm having the conversation, and my other amendments are going to be in the same vein. So at least I was transparent about that.
Councilor Preston?
So I guess maybe I'm still slightly confused. Are you advocating for saying that youth services should never be considered at the Brown School moving forward?
I am pushing for the council to take a position so that we can move forward. I have thought for a long time, actually, that NYS still had a role at the Brown, but it doesn't matter anymore. What matters is moving forward. If the majority of this council thinks there isn't a place, anything, for NYS at the Brown, which has been the conversation for at least this term, but also in the previous year, then let's take them off the board here. This ad hoc, as the at-large councilor mentioned, is going to be painful. I've done some of these, they are painful. So take it off the board. It's done. For a long time I held on because I thought it made sense, but at the same time, for the benefit of my ward, this is not fair either. You can't have it both ways. NYS is either done with the Brown or they're not done with the Brown. That's the question I'm asking tonight.
Councilor Preston and then Councilor Vogel.
So, we've already seen an order before us earlier this evening that looks at a transfer to explore the gym at the Brown School, and it specifically mentions the utilization of that gym by Newburyport Youth Services. So it seems like even if it's not the home, if the Brown School is not the home of Youth Services, they would still be potentially utilizing, at the very least, the gym at that building, no?
Councilor
I'll
Vogel?
yield for a minute.
Thank you. I love standing up and agreeing with you. It's one of my favorite things. I have been an advocate for divorcing NYS from the Brown School for quite some time. I think it leads to clarity. And as you say, it just gives us an opportunity to speak of them separately. I'm all in favor of that. That was why the second. And my head kind of exploded when you said it, which is why I didn't get second right out of my head. So I think it's a great idea. And with regard to the transfer coming in, we're going to have an opportunity to talk about that at committee of the whole. This whole thing has now gotten very nicely fluid, and I like it. I support it wholeheartedly. Take all NYS out of here. That doesn't necessarily mean NYS isn't considered. I just, as you say, we don't necessarily need to meet with them and get their opinions. We know what they are. Thank you.
All right.
Yeah, I wanted to, agree that order is coming in. I want to be consistent and upfront. Yes, I want the gym. If that's a surprise to anybody, let me know. But I'm not sure that it should be contemplated anymore for NYS. Basically, the bottom line is I'm taking the other side of the coin. So everybody says we want NYS to move forward. I'm done too. I want the Brown School to move forward. And I'm just done. I can't, you can't have it both ways. And this fight is actually going to come up several more times, unfortunately, particularly when we get into the finances, which have all been washed away since the 2017 affair, where a portion of the revenues from the Brown School were intended to help further the goals of NYS. So this is just the beginning of that conversation. But unfortunately, we can't be everywhere anymore. And if this committee is going to be efficient, then I think we start taking things off the board. So I'll leave it at that.
All right, there's Councilor Lane.
Yeah, just a comment and a question. If the sale of the Brown School is going to be considered by this board as well, not just what we're going to do with it. I've been through the Brown School with an expert who says there's asbestos through the whole building. So instead of spending more money on a dead horse, so to speak, and it pains me to say this, I want to know if that's one of the considerations with this ad hoc being formed is the sale of the Brown School.
Not on my agenda, but Councilor Cameron?
It's not on my agenda, but I think it'd be a possibility. I think looking, and again, I know a lot of this is redo for some councilors, and I know Councilor Zeid's put a lot of time into this, but I think, yeah, that would be something to look at. It'd be looking at housing options, number one, and I do acknowledge the change in language for other use deemed appropriate by the ad hoc or administration. So I'm open to it, but yeah, it's definitely a problematic building, which is partly why youth services ended up not being a fit there as a full-time place.
Councilor Vogel?
I'm sorry. So in response to a constituent, there is also the Brown School Overlay District, right, which sits out there, and tons of work done by the Ward 1 councilor. So I'm certain, because of the language in here, that'll also be considered. And so there's all of that's there. All you got to do is pull all the pieces together, and who knows what's going to happen, and I wish you the best of luck.
All right, so the motion on the floor right now is we have an amendment to strike NYS. Counselor, do we want to just vote on that now?
Please. Can I just make one more comment? And I am not trying to be contentious here, and normally that's my nature to not be contentious. But if I don't know how we can, like, say we'd have the gym discussion and the mayor's looking at a feasibility study on the gym, and you know, I'm agnostic on this. I want to learn more and kind of really take a reasoned position eventually. But say, yes, we need a gym because of X, Y, and Z, all these community needs, including NYS. I wouldn't want us to then say, well, back when we approved that order, we cut NYS out of that, and they can't use the gym. To me, these are sort of questions that the ad hoc would look at. So.
Counselor Khan?
Yeah, thank you, Council President. I think what would probably appease everybody here is that the parentheses examples don't need to be there.
Just take it out.
Because, and let me tell you why, it just says committee meetings with key stakeholders. And then, for example, don't list them. I mean, the ad hoc's mission could be to identify who they are, to have the conversation. I think if the pain point is to see NYS, I say strike the examples and then and move from there. And I have other comments, but I'll speak to that first.
Counselor Wallace.
Sure, just in general, I feel this is incredibly specific in terms of like the process. And I mean, having a guide is good, but it could go so many different ways depending on
That's my expectation.
Right, but, so I would not be against just cutting out some language if that makes it easier.
So do we want to make that amendment?
I think there's an amendment, sorry, Council President, but I believe there's an amendment, so maybe the ones who made the motion and seconded it, would they be open to just removing everything in the parentheses?
I'm sorry, I'm personally.
You just want NYS and then everything else can stay?
I'm sorry?
So you,
No, it's the other way. Strike NYS and leave the other ones.
okay.
That's this amendment.
And you're, okay.
We can vote on that.
So the motion to strike NYS from anywhere in the document, essentially 2 and 3, is on the floor.
Okay. All right. Motion to approve striking NYS from the full document. Say aye.
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 Those opposed?
No.
No.
2
Wait.
noes?
Sorry.
I'm sorry, that's okay.
I was going to make a motion to strike all the things in item row 2 and 3. Just take the parentheses of examples.
Second.
Discussion? Counselor Zede?
My next motion was going to be to add to that list, to add Parks Department and schools. This is sort of my point, right, is that there's been a lot that's gone into this already. And so every time I go to a committee meeting, it's like starting at the starting line again. And I am been asked to serve on this, which I appreciate, and I'm happy to do that. But people wonder why the Brown School hasn't gone anywhere in 7 years, and it's because the same question's being asked. So there have been some good ideas for this. NYS at the Brown was a good idea. It's done. It doesn't matter anymore. It's done. Okay? And so what's left there is affordable housing. Well, that sure makes sense. That's been a pretty central theme to this whole discussion. The facilities manager, sure. The Office of Planning, okay, yeah, makes sense. The two that were identified in some of the discussions last year were using it as what was called the City Hall Annex, so putting some municipal use in addition, like maybe if 59 Low Street is a thing, then Parks doesn't have anywhere. So does Parks have, is there something there? We've heard several times that the administrative use at the NOC is busy and the NOC is busting at the seams. Is that true? I don't know, but that's been discussed, which there's some irony there for the schools to maybe go back and use the Brown in some part. But at least it's more consistent with what's been talked about so we're going to strike everything out, so the committee's just going to discuss everything. I mean, that's like, the old movie where you flash and your memory's gone. I mean, this is like, let's start where we ended. So that's why I didn't want to support this. It's already on the floor. It's already been seconded. We can vote on it. But that was going to be my next motion, was to add a few departments into there.
Councilor Preston, and, oh, sorry, Councilor Lane?
Oh, go ahead. Oh, you.
So I'm much more akin to the amendment where it removes all of the examples because it leaves it open. I don't understand why, at this point, we're saying absolutely no to youth services, potentially yes to parks. I mean, is there some other department that might come along in the future that isn't listed and now can't be considered because they're not under the examples group? I don't understand why it isn't just easier to get rid of all of the examples, be open to any department that may come along, including youth services, including parks. And I think that just makes the most sense. Thank you.
Councilor Lane?
I'm not going to support this at all. I'm looking at it, and there's 5 counselors on this ad hoc. The race has already begun before it's going to come back to the whole council. I don't see how you can have 5 people on an ad hoc without even mentioning. I don't see any suggestion of possibly selling this for a reuse. Again, throwing money at this is beyond me, but I would like to, if I'm going to have the minority opinion here, I'm sure, but I'd like to see some language included in this as an amendment that includes potential resale of this, or potential sale of the Brown School. So I guess I'm going to make a motion to add.
Well, we have a motion on the floor right now.
Okay, I'll hold on.
To be clear, President, we have a motion to strike anything in the parentheses in number 2 and number 3 under proposed timeline, correct?
Correct. That's the motion on the floor.
First and
Councilor Vogel,
seconded.
do you have a comment on that you want to make right now?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you. Again, I like the NYS taken out of there because it makes it clear. In terms of the rest of them that are in there, I think it's just a guideline, right? It doesn't necessarily mean that you have to go to them. And I like the fact that it has been pointed out over and over again by the councilor from Ward 1 that we don't need to start over, right? So we know who the stakeholders are, and it's by identifying them and letting them lay in there, at least you can go like this to them and go, you know what, yeah, and not just leave it open, because otherwise we're going to be talking about this when I'm dead and gone.
All right. So the motion on the floor is to strike the examples in both lines.
Correct.
All right. All those in favor of striking the examples in the 2 lines as noted, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
No.
Roll call.
Councilor Preston?
Yes.
Councilor Vogel?
No.
Councilor Wallace?
Yes.
Councilor Wright?
Yes.
Councilor Zede?
No.
Councilor Cameron?
No.
Councilor Donahue?
No.
Councilor Khan?
Yes.
Councilor Lane?
Strike or not strike?
Strike. Yes, so yes, right?
So the motion is to strike anything in the
Yeah,
parentheses.
yes.
That's a
Sorry,
yes.
I was
Okay,
confused for a second.
that's okay. Councilor McCauley?
Yes.
Councilor Shan?
Yes.
Motion passes. So we now have motion approved as amended on the floor.
Okay. Councilor Zede, and then
Thank you.
Councilor
Counselor Lane had a motion, sorry.
I'm sorry, Councilor.
Sorry, that's right.
I did. I would make a motion for an amendment to add line 4. Discuss scope and basic terms for adaptive reuse and/or sale.
Second.
Yeah.
Discussion? Councilor Cameron?
Just a quick semantic, and I'll probably vote for this because I think it opens it up. There's a possible pathway. There's many pathways. We'll pick one. No doubt it will be rocky, but it is not uncommon in Massachusetts for nonprofit housing developers to work with the city and reuse a school. I think that that's. In the end, the city may own the land, the city may own the building, it may be a private nonprofit developer. It could be a private developer. There's a lot of different ways to get affordable housing put in. So I think it's fine to look at that. But yeah, whatever the scenario is, I mean, the city is not going to be putting millions of dollars into this. This is going to require somebody that's going to have to assemble a financing package from federal, state, tax credits, the whole shamil, and because we can't afford that. That's why we're not in the affordable housing business.
Thank you, Councilor Cameron. So the motion on the floor is, do you want to read the amendment?
At the end of the word reuse, we would insert and/or sale.
Okay.
Correct.
Yeah, I was just looking at number 4, the proposed timeline, committee meetings to the scope and basic terms for adaptive reuse and/or sale.
Correct.
All right. All those in favor of the amendment, say aye. Aye. Opposed? All right. Councilor Zaid.
Next amendment I'd like to make is to strike 4A, preservation of the main building and playground area.
Second.
I think we already cleared this hurdle. We're not demolishing the building. That was actually discussed, believe it or not, several times, whether this could become a park. And the playground is Article 97 and should not be a subject of any debate or discussion at this point. The playground stays unless we're really going to contemplate going to the state legislature and asking them to peel back Article 97.
Councilor Cameron?
I'd be supportive. That was the intent, I think, to have that line, because that's not, preserve or not preserve. It was preservation, but point taken.
I'm sorry, the second on that was Councilor Dunn? Thank you.
So understanding the intent, Councilor Zaid, you still want it struck?
Yes, please.
Councilor Vogel?
Yeah, I'm really sorry. So I agree with the understanding of Councilor, the at-large Councilor. It's giving the committee to discuss the scope and the basic terms of adaptive reuse, including the preservation of the main building and the playground area. So it's not discussing whether or not it should be preserved or not. It's talking about
It will be.
what?
No.
It's talking about preserving it and the playground area. So that's how I read it.
Yeah, that was the intent.
That's how that would be how I intended it. It's not whether it should be debated or not, but that it should be, that they recognize that the main building is preserved, as is the playground area. That's how I read it.
Councilor Khan, and then Councilor Lang.
Yeah, sorry, I just want to get clarification, because on my copy here, I'm striking A, and then you have this floating sentence, the adaptive reuse for housing. Is that a different letter, or does that strike all of that? Or am I looking at something crazy, maybe? Do you guys see that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So is that another letter?
No, it's part of A.
It's part of A? Then I'm not going to approve striking A. Again, I think what this is doing, oh, sorry, both of us are standing.
No, I'm sorry. I froze there for a second, sorry.
Okay, no, so I was just going to speak to the fact that I don't see anything wrong with keeping it, because it does, I think we're going to speak to this, or separate that other, the other statement next to it. So I guess I'm getting a little confused on when we strike one thing, we're striking the other piece as well, which I don't think we all wanted to do that.
Agreed. Councilor
Let me
Zaid?
refine my motion. So I thought that was a separate letter, because that was going to be my next amendment, so I'm sorry. But to strike preservation of the main building and playground from A, and then also to strike the appropriate unit / parking count, and then also percent of affordability / affordability mix, which were already discussed and debated in the Brown School Overlay District, which was stated is not the intent of this ad hoc. I can keep those as 2 motions if it's easier for people, but that was, I just thought they were 2 letters because it spilled onto the next page, so that's my mistake.
If Councilor Dunny is okay with that, I'd like to clarify it. So you're striking preservation of the main building and playground area.
Correct.
And you're striking the term
appropriate
clause,
unit /
appropriate use parking count.
Yep.
And the next
is percent / level of affordability / affordability mix.
Got it.
How do I rescind my second?
Just like that.
Okay.
She's
rescinding her second.
Pulling her second, so there's no second.
Correct. Okay.
Councilor Khan.
A second?
I don't know.
No, he doesn't.
Not yet.
Sure, I'll second it.
Can I make a friendly amendment to that? Is that okay?
Yeah, I mean, about 10 minutes.
Chair, may I?
Sure.
I'll yield.
I'm having fun picking things out of parentheses because, again, I think we're getting really prescriptive within these. So would that be something that the the person who made the motion would be open to?
What, doing what?
Parentheses?
Yes, so instead of just say adaptive reuse for housing or other deemed appropriate, or other use deemed appropriate by the ad hoc or administration.
Okay. Councilor Zede?
Yeah, so I certainly appreciate the sentiment and the effort, but this is probably the most challenging part for me, and this should come as no surprise, is that we had a long debate about the appropriate unit / parking count, percent level of, those are baked into the Brown School Overlay District. Now, I was told I was crazy when I was questioning, was this an effort to change the Brown School Overlay, which passed in 2019? And the answer was no, that's not the point here. You're crazy, don't worry about it. I'm testing that. And I do think that there's a desire to change that. And that, more so than any of the other amendments I have made or will make, is something that is a deal breaker for me.
Councilor Vogel?
Yeah, thank you. You know, the overlay district is really interesting and a lot of work and well done. I've said that before and I'll say it again. And I know that the Ward 1 councilor, has some very strong feelings about the numbers and so on and so forth. I think it's time to to kind of open that up a little bit and let it all be discussed, and that way we'll get somewhere. If we're gonna draw lines in the sand and stick to them, it's gonna be hard. And I think that the intent of this effort here is to get to those lines and to go, okay, yes or no, yes or no. So again, I think that the overlay district speaks for itself. You're absolutely right. I don't see any intent in here of overriding that overlay district. However, I think that overlay district definitely needs to be considered and needs to be looked at and considered in this as it is discussed here. And I don't think it's necessarily an intent to undo it, but that's just me. If you read it, it's an interesting document.
Councilor Lane?
Yeah, is there an amendment currently on the floor?
I can tell you what I think is on the floor. It's a motion to strike 4A. That's the first sentence, preservation, all the way to the word playground area, and also to strike appropriate unit parking count, and also strike percentage level of affordability mix.
Okay, I guess I have more to add to it if we can go in.
Folks, yeah. Why don't we...
I have the right to make an amendment.
Hang on one second, Counselor. I just want to make sure we're all clear here. So we're looking to strike. So who was the first amendment by? Was it by Counselor Zede or was it by Counselor Khan? Because Counselor Khan had the first.
No, Counselor Zede, seconded by Counselor Lane.
Okay,
Right.
thank you. Okay. So what is your amendment, Counselor
I just want
Lane?
to add, I want to add that 6 through 13 make no sense to me where a sale could be considered in this process. So construction start, number 13, what are we constructing if we don't know what the highest and best use of this building is?
Again, this was...
And I'd also like to add a appraisal to be done on the value of the building right up front.
Again, this was just to put the committee together, to put together these line items to find a path forward. That's all it was. So why don't we vote on what's the amendment on the floor? So Clerk Jones, do you want to read it again?
Again, it's a motion to strike 4A, the following: preservation of the main building and playground area, and also the words appropriate unit / parking count, and the words percentage level of affordability mix. That's what's on the floor right now.
Councilor McCauley.
Just a point of order. So what's going to be left is it's going to say adaptive reuse for housing or other deemed appropriate by the ad hoc or administration. Is that what's left?
Well, I still have the words type, feasibility, and or other use.
Target population.
And target population, correct.
Okay. Is that but that's what's left?
That's what's left.
Okay, thank you.
All right, all those in favor of striking those words, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
No. Roll call.
Okay. Councilor Preston?
No.
Councilor Vogel?
No.
Councilor Wallace?
Yes.
Councilor Wright?
Yes.
Councilor Zede?
Yes.
Councilor Cameron?
No.
Councilor Donahue?
No.
Councilor Khan?
Yes.
Councilor Lane?
Present.
Councilor McCauley?
Yes.
Councilor Shan?
No.
Motion fails, needing 6, receiving 5.
Councilor Zede.
I'm not going to make any more amendments because that one was, as I promised, a deal breaker for me. So I think, to me, speaking now on the underlying motion, which is the motion to approve this now as it's been amended a little bit, I just wanted to, first of all, finish that conversation and then express a few other concerns. There are some things that are challenging about this that seemingly are very difficult to the point that it's difficult to talk about. There are incompatibilities between the neighborhood and higher density. There are incompatibilities between what the building and the neighborhood can sustain against what affordable housing can actually be done against from a financing perspective. I don't know this because I just woke up this morning and I know it. I know it because I've spent many years on it. And that wasn't just the 2017 process, which I think many are tired of hearing about it, and I wish I never was part of it, but I was. But also the 2019 process, also many conversations with the Affordable Housing Trust members, directly and indirectly, particularly through that rezoning. What you need to know about the Brown School overlay, because now I am in a defensive posture, because I respectfully can see where the conversation will go. The Brown School overlay contemplated every possible outcome. It contemplated youth services there. It contemplated them not there. It actually contemplated the gym being there or the gym not being there. So for those who haven't spent any few minutes brushing up on that is a relatively short document in the annals of City Council, but it's pretty packed with a lot of things. And that maximum unit count is what is protecting the neighborhood. And that is why I am so viscerally opposed to any effort to try and change it, especially that it passed in 2019. It has never really been effectuated yet because we haven't been able to move anything forward. So for that reason alone, I'm going to vote no, but I also want to state 2 other concerns that I mentioned in committee that have yet to be resolved. One is the timeliness. So one thing that's missing from this whole conversation is the information we really need to adjudicate these questions, whether you agree with the amendments or not. Most notably, costs surrounding the gym, et cetera. I think, personally, to not know the cost at Low Street, to not have any details, to basically move forward from something into something that's technically vapor right now does not make good public policy sense to me. But again, I think that we're going to move forward with this ad hoc. We're going to come together, and then we're going to say, boy, I really wish we had these pieces of information, because without them, it's useless. I can stand up and say, I really want the gym until I'm blue in the face, until I can have a number that's defensible, and we can start to argue about that. We're spinning our wheels. So ironically, we have an order coming in tonight, which is not the subject of this, so I'll leave it off, but that too will need to go through its process. And then the final one I brought up that I do think is a real concern, whether it's been brushed off by some or not, that's the composition of this committee. And I addressed this when it came in, and I will address it again, and that is having 3 members of planning and development, which we just established will basically be talking about zoning, is very troubling, because residents are not, there's no zoning process around ad hoc. So when a zoning amendment, as we know, comes in, it has notice requirements, it has all these things, it has planning board hearings, et cetera. And I think to create a fait accompli where 3 members of the committee are essentially meeting, now, I'm not saying it's necessarily illegal, but that doesn't mean it's right either. So yeah, they have to post the meetings, of course, they're going to be public meetings and so forth, but members of the public, those protections and provisions under 40A exist for a reason, and they will not be adhered to under this. So you could come out with even 5 councilors saying, forget about just the planning and development. You could just say, hey, we're basically redoing zoning via this method, and I think that does disenfranchise people. So I really did here to try and make some amendments that I thought would be fair, but I have to revert back to my original position, and that's where I will end. Thank you.
Councilor Khan?
Yeah, great. Thank you, Council President. I'm really happy to see this actually be developed. I think there's a lot of now maybe traction we could make on this topic. My one advice to the chair, I'm guessing the chair of this,
Councilor Cameron?
yes, the other counselor at large, I do recommend some kind of a facilitator or moderator is what I would recommend, you know, looking at the composition. Already hearing that this might get, a lot of topics may come up, but you want to be progressive, meaning you want to move forward and not just spin. So I would say maybe someone who's not tied into it, not a counselor, not someone on one of the boards and commissions here, someone in another city maybe to come in and just moderate this group. But I think to move forward on these topics, you're going to need to consider that. And I'm just offering that as a friendly suggestion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Khan. Councilor Lane?
I'm going to vote no, and clearly. But my last thoughts are, the story is already written here. This is typical Newburyport. We already know what we're going to do, or we have an idea what we want to do and not explore other uses. I'm sure the city, if they got $4 million, could put that money towards a new youth services center. But where we're the city that money grows on trees, so be it. I just wanted to state my thoughts, and I'll yield for now.
All right. Councilor Preston?
I just want to say, you know, the Brown School has sat in disuse for so very long, despite the stewardship from the Ward 1 counselor. And, you know, I share his goals of not letting the building just languish any longer. I think we really owe it to the community, the neighborhood, to do something, to move it from an eyesore to something that they can really feel good about within the neighborhood. And I sincerely believe that the reason it has sat for so long is because there hasn't been a committee like this to be able to create an inertia in a direction, including potentially selling it. So if this committee doesn't happen, then I don't see how the sale ever happens either. I think it just sits and languishes, and therefore I'm going to vote yes for this formation.
Thank you. All right. Further discussion?
Just a point of order. Sections 6 through 13 lay out the pathway to me of what's going to be done or wants to be done. Yield with that.
Thank you. All right. All those in favor of the ad hoc for the Brown School being established via Order 324 as amended, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
That would be 2 no?
2 noes.
3 noes, thank you.
2.
Just 2, sorry.
Okay, that was easy.
And that's it for general government. We'll have another meeting. We'll try to schedule it sometime next week for all the additional stuff that was brought in tonight, in addition to the continuation discussion on the Kelly School Fund. So next, Neighborhood and City Services, Councilor Wallace.
This will be an easy one.
Famous last words.
Motion to approve ordinance 109, amendment to sidewalk materials. Second. All right. This, after 2 spirited meetings, debates, I think it was clear that any changes to the sidewalk ordinance might have to be kind of a bigger discussion and perhaps occur at a later date. So for this amendment, there's just a couple minor changes, and the intent is to allow for flexibility for additional material, asphalt, upon approval of a waiver from the city council. So just because we say they can have asphalt in here doesn't mean that all the sidewalks are going to be asphalt. There would be another step where DPS or a developer or a resident would come in and ask for a waiver. And another piece of that is the ordinance change allows for asphalt to be used around tree roots, which is a pretty common situation. And also you need to use stone dust. I think that was in there as well for ADA purposes. So the committee voted 2-1 to approve. And with that, maybe I can hand it off to one of the sponsors.
Councilor Z. There was a motion from Councilor Wallace. Who was the second?
Councilor Z.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Z.
Yeah, so I just wanted to speak to this as a sponsor. So just a quick thing. You know, many years ago, the council passed this original ordinance, which requires brick and concrete, and then brick downtown and brick or concrete anywhere else. In the intervening time, we've had more years, more roadway projects, and that's brought up this question about utilization of asphalt and when it's okay and when it's not. And probably one of the biggest drivers of that is simply straightforward cost. So it's an order of magnitude more expensive. And I just want to start by saying that I don't have a love for asphalt or anything, but I do have a love for volume of road work. I do. I think about it, I dream about it, I wake up and I think about it. So you have to have some flexibility in order to be able to achieve that. And for example, we had the Phillips Drive neighborhood, which was part of a much broader project that proposed and had asphalt sidewalks, but we sort of had some trouble there, right? Because that's not what the ordinance says. So last year, I had put in a version of this that amended this to have a bright line rule, but it changed the bright line rule. And it did not meet with tremendous positivity, and that's okay. And so decided to reintroduce it this year, and I'm glad that the Ward 5 councillor joined me, and I want to give him credit. The concept of a waiver is his innovation, not mine, as a way to not have a bright line test to assuage concerns that it would just become then the de facto material everywhere, but still have a relief somewhere. And almost every ordinance we write, we try and put some relief in there because you just can't anticipate every possible project. And throughout the discussion, what we've learned is everybody intuitively feels asphalt's okay in some places, but no one has yet been able to define where that is. So it's hard, it's easy to think about, and I know it when I see it, but it's very difficult to write it. So I think that this is a good compromise and would provide some flexibility to DPS, but also provide some public process. I received an email today from a resident of mine asking about their street and asking about asphalt. They are on the list for this year. And I told them personally, and I'm happy to say it here, that I would favor asphalt for their street if the alternative is not having that sidewalk done at all. And so I think people really need to think about what we're actually arguing about. We're arguing about leaving the garbage sidewalk that's there now. We're not arguing about a pristine new concrete sidewalk often versus a pristine new brick sidewalk or asphalt sidewalk. We're talking about existing being made better. The last thing I want to address is that we're just not going to be able to necessarily all of us agree on the role of the council on some of these matters. But it's been said several times, the council does three things, and it's sort of famous, the money, the appointments, and the laws. But it's just so much grayer than that. And ironically, in this case, it's not all that gray because the council does have jurisdiction over the public way. That's why parklets are our thing. It's why we get other plans having to do with utilization of the streets or sidewalks for events and closing them and so forth. So this one is, incredible. There are many others that are much more difficult, but this one really isn't that hard. And this provides a relief that doesn't exist now. So this is less strict than the current ordinance and does represent a step towards providing a little bit more leeway, particularly in flexibility to the administration. And it's worth supporting because if you think about it, the alternative is to leave this ordinance as it is, in which case it's very simple math. The plan you see will either have to shrink by volume or the cost, or we will have to find more money. And certainly we could discuss either one of those, but the more likely one is the former, the reduction of work. And I think that's bad for the city. So I hope you will support it, and you'll have plenty more opportunities if you're not happy with it to vote against or for waivers.
Councilor Preston, and then Councilor Vogel.
So I was the one who voted against this coming out of committee, and I voted against it for two different reasons. One, I really feel like we should have done the work to tackle the material section. There are no easy answers today, and there's not going to be any easy answers in the future. And we... Oops. Busy over here. I think our real challenge here is that if we start the sidewalks this year under this ordinance and then change the ordinance, we run the risk of offering free brick to residents today and potentially asking them next year to either pay for brick or, as has been suggested by a councillor, to not offer brick as an option at all. So we could be giving people free brick sidewalks today and then telling them next year they can't have brick sidewalks at all. And so it's really disheartening to me that we didn't put more effort into tackling that piece of it. But secondarily, I also cannot agree with Part D. Well, I also do not have a particular love of asphalt, and luckily for me, I do not wake up in the morning thinking about it. I do have a love for volume, so I'm not opposed to the use of asphalt where appropriate. I am opposed to the necessitation of a waiver from the City Council. I feel like we need to leave DPS to get the work done. They understand what the competing priorities are, and I feel like we do not need to be creating excess delays within the council, and that they should be free to do that without a waiver.
Councilor Vogel?
Thank you, Council President. I would say that that's my sentiment as well with regard to the Section D and the waivers. I listened to the meeting. I didn't attend. I listened, and it didn't seem as though you got to an end where it was understood when and if or how or what a waiver would be taken care of. And the example that I saw or heard is that they're working. DPS is out there working here, they're working on this street, and now they have some excess material, and oh my gosh, we could go right over there, but oh, we got to go out for a waiver. And it goes to waste, or they don't get that done. So I didn't hear how that gets addressed. I heard that the waiver maybe comes as part of the plan at the, but that's not what it says. It doesn't say that DPS at their discretion can go one street over because they have extra asphalt and put it down. That's not what it says. It says that, to me, it doesn't say that. But if it does say that, that'd help me understand.
I just wanted to address a few things. First of all, just sort of thinking about the concept of we're offering free brick this year and then asking to charge. The current, there may be, I'm not sure, the current ordinance doesn't require brick. So I guess I'm not clear on how that logic path works. I mean, today, under today's ordinance, with no change, they can go to any street and take out brick and put in concrete. That's a factual, it's intended as a factual statement. Just in reading the literal language, that's what we have today. So, I mean, to the same extent that some residents get city services and others don't, I mean, I suppose there's some truth in there, but I mean, just factually speaking, right now, it's not, I think there's been some idea that it's a replacing kind is what we have today. That's not the case. That's not what's written. That's not what the language says. I was on the council when the original one passed, and that wasn't the intent at the time. The intent was that the floor is concrete. That was the intent of, like, there's nothing below concrete. It has to be that or higher. It's entirely possible that, yes, they have slated to do a street in brick at the city's expense, but that's something you could, frankly, attack through the money if you take offense to that. I think that's the better place to do it as opposed to here where we're just saying what are the allowable materials and what's the path to get there. So that's my first one. The second one is, again, the necessity of a waiver is, I think, this is just one of those things that's really hard to explain unless you've been a ward councilor. So if you're a ward councilor, this is what your life is. This is all you hear about is what material you're using on my road. Is my road getting done? And yes, the residents are deeply interested to know the answers to these questions, and not kind of know the answers definitively, especially if their street is on the plan anytime on the horizon, anytime that they can reasonably see. So I think that with due respect, it's just a different perspective. I live this in my inbox. I'm seeing nodding from some of my ward colleagues, and I'm sure they would agree, but this is what people ask us all the time. And so that brings me to the last couple, which is the form of the waiver. This is purposely vague on the, they could be anything from coming in with a singular order and saying, I want to put asphalt here tomorrow. Or, and in my opinion better, it could be come in the plan, which is really the better idea because the plan has more time. We're trying to transition this year into this new planning thing. We're trying to get money earlier so that the planning can be done in the fall rather than haphazardly in the spring, which is better for DPS, it's better for residents, and it's better for the city council. And if you're asking me how I envision it, we're trying to look beyond the next 3 weeks, the next 3 months. We're trying to look, I personally think the 5-year rolling plan is great, but I'm really personally focused on the next 2 years, this year and next year. And I think you should be able to start to foresee this stuff, and we should start to treat roads a little bit more seriously. This is not, it's interesting because I have a different reaction. When I hear that DPS has asphalt left over and they can go around the corner, all I can think about is my phone lighting up. That's all I think about is, first of all, residents are completely taken by surprise. All of a sudden, all the parking, and you may think that's not a big deal. They're finally getting their sidewalk done, stop complaining. But if you haven't been a ward councilor for a while or haven't done it, you have no idea. You will spend your whole day, weekend there on site talking to residents, calming them down, explaining to them, and then they're going to ask you, well, I don't get it. Why wasn't there a process for this? And you're going to say, well, I don't know. This is just how we do things in Newburyport. It doesn't seem great. So this is a step in the right direction, but it doesn't say the waiver has to be in 2 weeks, 2 months before, and it has to be this number of hours. It just says, come and ask us for a waiver by order. To me, the plan would be a great opportunity to do that. I think this is academic that we have extra money at the end of the year, but if for some reason that should happen, fantastic, come in with an order and we'll process it. We'll do an emergency preamble if that's what it needs to be. But I think let's be real life about this. The reality is taking it more seriously means having a plan this year and next year. And I think that residents are asking for this, to have that process to protect them. And that's germane to the other conversation we're going to have too. So I wanted to say those things.
Councilor Khan, then Councilor Vogel.
Great, thank you, Council President. I think one of the reasons, well, first of all, I did attend the meeting on this topic, and I appreciate some of the amendments that have been incorporated. What I wanted to share is, I think because I do want to look ahead, and I do want to think in the next 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, we recognize that this section needs to be, there's flaws in it. And I feel like if we take time, we could really refine it. And one of the things I brought up in committee is the way the districts are defined are really zoning districts. And in kind of conversations with DPS, there is, we're saying downtown overlay district, but if you look at that, that was done as a zoning, and now we're saying brick must be required there, where I don't think it all has to be brick, but that's just me personally. But I'm thinking that for sidewalk materials, a holistic perspective needs to be applied. We hear from ward councilors, some that would really freak out if they got asphalt, but we also know some streets don't have sidewalks, and if they got asphalt, they'd be very happy with it. There's also new design standards for asphalt that actually do a little hedging, and it's become more it's actually very pleasing depending on what area of the city you're in. Someone suggested you could do asphalt and then paint it white to make people feel better, but I chuckled at that. But I think, all kidding aside, I think this section can be refined, and I think this is the time frame. So I do support the other councilor at large who spoke earlier that if we take time, refine this. We have time to do this before these projects start. We could come across and now have that 3-5 year plan come out and be consistent. I feel like this is the time to build that consistency, to build that equity across the city as well for all wards. This isn't cutting it. And when we talk about the DPS deputy director did say the example was if there is asphalt, it would be places where maybe there are no sidewalks. So there's opportunity. So I don't think there'd be something drastically happening where residents would be upset. But in general, I would just suggest that we really, we kind of work on this. And either we could keep it in committee, or if someone else wants to tackle it, we could try it that way. Because I do think there's really good elements that we could incorporate now to refine this. Thank you.
Councilor Wallace? Councilor McCauley afterwards.
A great example is on Merrimack Street where I live. And right now the sidewalks that are out there are illegal. They were put in without, this was right before I became a councilor. So we're talking about from the roundabout down to about the Pioneer area. And the backlash was, you all heard it. It was crazy. And to this day, it's like, why do we get these? And I always said, why didn't, I don't want to rehash this all, but why didn't DPS or the administration come to the council and say, look, we have this big discrepancy in money, and have that process? And that maybe that would have calmed everything down. But that's just one way you could at least explain to residents, or I don't know, not just go out and do it. So that's why I think it's really important to come to the council and have a process. I don't like asphalt. I don't think I ever want it in a residential area, but there may be certain exceptions if it's a large project where it's a lot of money, like on Phillips Drive, or if they need to do some patching, or out in the industrial park, for example. So I think the waiver process is just more flexibility. So I support the waiver. It's just a small piece of a change that could happen later. That's all. Thanks.
Councilor McCauley and then Councilor Zaid.
Thank you, Council. Thank you, Council President. In the committee, we had a bit of a compromise, right, in that discussion. And the compromise was to put in these two simple, what we thought were simple amendments at the time, with the idea that we would keep up with the 5-year rolling plan, so that we weren't the curveball, we weren't the impediment, we weren't the problem in keeping up with the next year's sidewalk plan. And the compromise that we came in with was we do this in a two-step process. And the two-step process is we do these two things now to at least give the administration some guidance that yes, and support that yes, we were going to do that. And the second piece is in the next 3 or 4 months is that we'd open up the entire sidewalk ordinance to cover all of the things. The Ward 2 councilors who's in the room now, was very adamant about some of the materials being particular for disabilities, and had done a lot of homework on that. But there were too many changes to make in the time frame to be able to get it aligned with the 5-year plan. So for those who want more discussion about it, I welcome more discussion about it. But I think the answer really is that we all have to go away and do some homework as to what we want to see here and the changes we want to see. And then when we reopen it, when we have a little downtime, maybe in August or something like that, where we can start to have a fuller discussion. Because I will speak to what the other ward councils have said. People are very emotionally attached, and rightfully so, to their sidewalk and the quality of the work done, and et cetera. And I'm hoping that we can be more consistent, right? I'm hoping that we can communicate better with them that says, your road is going to be done this year, this sidewalk over here is going to be done next year, and vice versa, and we'll be able to do that. Again, I'm asking for the consideration to approve the sidewalk ordinance with its minor changes now, with the idea that we'd all agree that we'll open this up again in 3 or 4 months. But we have to do our own homework on this to be able to come with the different materials, the different designs, and all of those things. Thank you.
Councilor Zaid.
I just wanted 2 things. One is I just wanted to fill in a little bit of history. So 2 councils ago, I sort of ended up being chair of neighborhood towards the end of it. And actually this conversation started then. I think some who were around might remember that. But at the time, we'd actually started this conversation about process, and the then administration had the same concern, like, hey, our hands are kind of tied here. We can't ever use asphalt, and that's a challenge for us. And we all agreed that, hey, that'd be a broader part of the discussion. So that was like 3 or 4 years ago. Fast forward, I just want to remind you that, I did try this last year with a bright line. So if your preference is not to have any council involvement, the answer is to write a bright line rule and just say it has to be brick here, it has to be concrete there, and it can be asphalt everywhere else. And I called every ward councilor before I put it in. I got very mixed responses, and then it was frankly pretty tepid when it came in, and then just died at the end of the session, which is okay. It just didn't have legs, which is fine. Some things don't. But I'm just saying that it has been tried, and interestingly, to the at-large councilor's point, the zones were talked about. One member or one resident visited and said, well, have you thought about doing this actually around the zoning lines or around this? And then we started thinking about different districts, but we looked at it, but the problem was like R2 is too expansive, for example. It doesn't, there's still too many different neighborhoods. And so unless you're going to get down to like this street has to be concrete and this has to be, these lines actually are not a bad way to think about it. And even the one I put in last, this one actually started with the downtown control, or what's called the Newburyport Historic District, not an LHD or anything. And I think some got that map. I sent it to them when it was requested, were surprised it was larger than they thought. So a couple efforts have been made here, and I just wanted to fill in that historical gap. And the last thing is, if you want a larger review of that, that's not mutually exclusive with supporting this tonight. This is something that gets us, I mean, this is a compromise for me too. I don't necessarily, I put in something else, and then this was what we thought. First of all, it's a very narrow change, extraordinarily narrow, and it doesn't bind anybody to supporting asphalt for life. It just says, here's a pathway to go. And frankly, it solves some legal problems we have with projects that we want to do in asphalt, and we already know we do, but we actually don't have any path. And I think that we probably should address that. I mean, we just should. And just one last thing. You can't make an exception to an ordinance by order. So you can't just pass a law and then accept it for some project because you want it by order. You're breaking your own laws, and that I think was what the Ward 4 councilor is saying, is there's no relief. And that's very difficult kind of environment to live in. So even if you want a bigger review, you don't have to say no tonight.
Councilor Vogel.
Okay, sorry, thank you. Yeah, to all that was been spoken, I get it, and I see the hard work. I appreciate the hard work. All the sentiment, all the history, great suggestions going forward. I'm open to the idea of addressing it down the road. I just would like an answer to the question, how do you get an exception? What does that work? It wasn't answered at the meeting. It was asked and it wasn't answered. It was asked and it wasn't answered. So how do you get it?
Okay. Councilor McCauley.
And
Thank you, Council President.
does it stop progress?
First of all, it doesn't stop progress because we've made the wrong assumption that if we had asphalt left over from a project, that we'd go attack a sidewalk. You know what? There's 70 other miles of streets in Newburyport that have potholes as big as these laptops. I think we'd probably reuse our asphalt to maybe fill in some potholes and to iron out some other streets, as opposed to saying, oh, by the way, because we're done at 2 o'clock, we need a waiver by 3:30 to keep the crew here so we can go around the corner and start a brand new sidewalk, because I got to dig it up, then I got to prep it, then I got to do all that. So what we got the other night is we got a hypothetical example of something that never happens. And so here we are, right? So if we had this happen in the past, we wouldn't have Merrimack Street be half concrete and half asphalt, right? We'd have things that got fixed. And so I think, in my ward alone, I have asphalt sidewalks. I have work orders in for 6 of them that have giant tree roots that are coming up. And so if there was extra in a project, I would hope they'd go through the work orders and do that. But that's me, right? I'm not dictating anything to DPS, right? I have extra material and I have work orders that need a small batch of it. I think that's a nice match. But again, that's me, that's not them. And so I can't, it's like drawing a red line that says this is where you'll do this, and I can't legislate to an example that doesn't exist. It's a hypothetical. So I know we didn't answer the question because we can't. So that's why we keep going round and round on this. And so again, I'll come back to this could be the quickest way for us to take a step forward. Maybe it's a half a step forward. I hope to think it's a full step forward, and then we'll be able to round out those areas that have been identified as weakness in the plan. Thank you.
Councilor Lane, then Councilor Zede, and then Councilor Donahue.
Just real quick, Ward 6 will take any asphalt that we can get, because what's a sidewalk? We don't have any sidewalks up there. It's completely unsafe. Noble Street's unsafe. We'll take it.
Councilor Zede.
Well, I think Councilor Donahue hasn't spoken. I'll go after if you wish.
Councilor Donahue.
Okay, thank you. I just would like to make a few points. One is I really need to agree with Ward 5 Councilor in that we have not seen an example, though we were given this hypothetical. We've never, I think in the history of the city, had a project run where we had extra left over to do more work on another sidewalk or road. I think if that scenario had ever happened, we would all know about it. But unfortunately, the way that costs run, the way that work runs, the way that everything runs, we end up running over. And we end up with examples like we have on Merrimack Street with half and half. So I see the opposite happening much more realistically than the hypothetical we were given. It's definitely a grand what if to consider, but it's a what if that's never happened. And I also wanted to make the point that while this doesn't address the entire sidewalk ordinance, there were comments made by the mayor at one of the meetings that if we don't move this along, essentially, we're going to end up with a roads plan because they're not going to be able to afford all of the sidewalks in concrete and brick. So to me, this piece isn't necessarily about this being complete, because it's not, and I think it does need to be revisited in a few months. But B, it's allowing the streets and sidewalk plan to move ahead to include asphalt and to actually meet the budget that we have to work with. And I think that's something that's, we need to keep our eye on the prize with this. And the waiver, I think, is necessary because this is new territory for us. So I think it does make sense to have some oversight and to not have it just be, sort of all that decision being on one person with no input from the city or the residents or anything like that. We need to know what's happening. And if they want to use asphalt, it might be in the plan, it might not be in the plan, but I think it does need to be requested. I don't think that, I actually feel that. I feel it does need to be requested. And with that, as I said before, I think we definitely need to really overhaul the sidewalk ordinance in general, but now's not the time to do that. We need to just move this forward so they can continue with the roads and sidewalks plan, so it's not just a roads plan. Yield. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Donahue.
I only need to speak if you still have questions.
No,
Okay.
I'm good.
Okay.
I'm ready to
good
move
too.
it. I'm ready to move it.
All right. So the motion on the floor is?
To approve ordinance 109. Ordinance requiring a roll call.
This time.
Roll call for approving ordinance 109. Councilor Preston.
No.
Councilor Vogel.
Yes.
Councilor Wallace.
Yes.
Councilor Wright.
Yes.
Councilor Zede.
Yes.
Councilor Cameron.
Yes.
Councilor Donahue.
Yes.
Councilor Khan.
No.
Councilor Lane.
Yes.
Councilor McCauley.
Yes.
Councilor Shan.
Yes.
9-2. First reading. Ordinance passes.
I think that was 8-3.
I'm sorry, I had Councilor
Councilor
Preston
Khan.
and I had Councilor Khan. Anyone else know?
Vogel?
He said yes.
I said yes.
Oh, you said yes. Oh, I so rarely hear those words out of your mouth.
All right, Councilor Wallace, let's keep going.
All right, so, still in neighborhood city services, motion to receive and file communication 395, streets and sidewalks plan.
Second.
Okay, so we had 3 meetings, lengthy, good discussions about the new 5-year rolling plan prepared by the new administration and DPS. You've all seen it, you're familiar with it, but it's basically 2 spreadsheets now. There's one spreadsheet of the 5-year plan, and then there's a deep dive spreadsheet of just the first year that's broken down by, what's proposed for the road and costs and all that fun stuff. The plan is arranged by wards, so it's first year is 1, 3, 5, next year is 2, 4, 6. And let's see. And because it is a communication, we are not officially approving it, but rather receiving and file. And the committee voted 3-0 to receive and file. Thank you.
Further discussion. Councilor Z?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that this is really good news, and that it's exciting to see some money going into roads and some actual planning start to get done. Again, I've opined tonight at length about the life of a ward councillor, but you can't underestimate the importance of this. But much like we just had the discussion on the sidewalks, I think this is the start. You know, it's not the finish, right? So we have this. It's you know, I think DPS has put a lot of time in. The committee chair and the committee put a ton of time into it as well. And I've been getting questions from residents, but it's been easier to actually point to something instead of just say in theory there's this thing that exists, but you can't see it because it's not really a thing. So that's good. And I just want to tie this back now that we have, you know, next year, you know, funded in a serious way, that this opens the door to like having this conversation in November or December or January or February, long before the trucks can roll. And so I'm just expressing some, you know, some gratitude and some content here that we have something that actually start to look like something. And I'm really looking forward to the coming years where we can keep building on this. And I think a 5-year rolling and I'm going to say 2-year, but a 1 to 2 year like deep dive is where the money's at and will be really great for residents. So I'm looking forward to growing on this.
Councillor Lang?
I just want to, again, I think it's great. Any movement in this is fantastic. My one comment that I will say is Noble Street is a ticking time bomb. It's a matter of time before somebody gets hit, and Bourbeau is relatively safe in comparison. So the administration can take that for what it's worth. I'd like to see some movement on Noble Street at some point soon. I don't even think it should be a part of this, but it is a huge safety concern. No, yield.
Thank you, Councillor Lang. Councillor Wallace?
Sure, I would like to also commend the administration and DPS for starting this process. This is something I think will...
Still on mute.
I seem to be seeking attention.
Have a cup of coffee, stay awake.
What was I saying? The process will move us forward. So, and this is the first time I feel like it's been truly transparent and like posted on the website. You can point to things, there's costs. So I'm very excited about that. The downside, however, is I don't entirely agree with the methodology of how the roads were chosen. I would have preferred to see it based on condition of the road. I know there's the ward process, which I understand it to a certain extent, that makes sense to me, but Ward 4, as a result of this process, really got shortchanged because there is a proportionally larger amount of roads, probably in bad shape and also more expensive, so it's harder to do those roads. And we also have many safety concerns there too, because we've got like the major, roads, High Street, Merrimack Street, all that. So I think where I'm very excited about this plan, but where I'm not feeling confident is the beta report that we keep talking about. I know there was data that was posted, but if you look at any other community, they get this nice little report with raw data, and I'm getting a ton of questions from residents about that. I just feel like that would have been a valuable piece, the original, again, raw data, so that we know what the actual street ratings are, and so that we can make sense of like questioning why some roads are on and some aren't. So I think there's improvement to be made there, but at the same time, overall, I'm happy we're moving in this direction. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wallace. All right, further discussion? All right, all those in favor of receiving and filing?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? All right, anything else, Councillor Wallace?
All I would say is we have a meeting tomorrow evening on stormwater ordinance changes.
All right.
Not streets, so but that is all. Nothing further. Thank you.
Councillor Wallace. Councillor Cameron.
Thank you, President. Thank goodness we started really early.
We're going to have 10:30, right?
So I'm going to make our evening a little bit shorter. I'd like to make a motion to refer ordinance 105, which is the zoning amendment for business park uses. I make a motion to refer that back to Planning and Development and also Committee of the Whole.
Second.
Planning and Development met in a joint hearing with the Planning Board last Wednesday. We did vote 2-1 to bring this forward to the council with an approval. I'm asking to put it back to the full council. After further reflection, Councilor Wallace wanted to do some more research. I think there has been other interest expressed in understanding what community center is and what the definition is. I know Director Port sent an email out earlier today about spot zoning and its applicability or not to this particular process. And what is in your packet is a little bit different than what we would need to vote on the floor because there were some changes made with the planning board. And some of these are the little tiny S's and P's and I's and J's, and it would be kind of a mess to do on the floor. So I'll post a planning and development and a committee of the whole. My sense is anything youth services potentially related, and I know this would potentially only be allowing it, the potential of it, that use for that site, but I know there's lots of interest, and I know if it's just the three of us, then other councilors may be wanting to come and talk, and that can be problematic. So that's the reason for the motion to refer back to Planning and Development and Committee of the Whole.
Okay. Questions? All those in favor of referring back to Planning and Development and Committee of the Whole?
Aye.
Say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Nay.
I'd like to make a motion to collectively return the other two, which have been removed per the consent agenda, the communication about global and the appointment of Dan Mello, refer those back to Planning and Development. I just was not able to get a meeting together. Those are going to be pretty routine, but that's on me. Thank you.
Somebody want to get Counselor?
Oh. Thank you.
Counselor Z?
I just on the global one, just because it's timely, and Counselor, the Ward 2 Counselor is aware because I included her on some emails, but I had a question for a resident, even though it's not my ward, but I just wanted to report back what I found in case anybody gets the same question. So the question was about like when the tanks are going to be removed and so forth, and I wouldn't say it now unless it was timely. So interestingly, I learned today that the removal of tanks is done under the authority of the Mass Fire Code. So the permitting authority is actually the fire department, not the building department, not anything else. It's the fire department. DEP is not involved unless there's contamination, and so far they're waiting for the LSP to take samples, licensed site professionals. So while it's done under 21E, it's own DEP only. Like they don't come for site inspections or visits unless there's identified contamination. So who knows? The tanks are slated to be removed next week because everybody was asking me why they were seeing the fences there that I got. These were a resident of mine. And then the fire department will be on site. They have to be actually there when they remove the tanks, just in case there is an incident. So there already will be a fire truck parked there. And then finally, the tanks are considered quote unquote newer. They're roughly 10 years old, so they're not anticipating like major problems. So just in case anybody else gets the same questions, did the chase down for you, and hopefully it helps. Thank you.
Thank you for doing the chase down. Counselor Kristen?
You may not know the answer to this, but I noticed heavy machinery doing some big digging there today. Anybody know what they're actually doing today?
They're starting.
Getting closer.
They started today.
So they're removing everything except the tank?
I think they're prepping.
Okay.
All right.
Okay.
I was just told the removal of the tank, so maybe like the day the crane shows up and plucks them out of the ground, but maybe they're
So
excavating.
taking everything out
All
off
right,
the top of the tank, so to speak.
All right. It is, Counselor Wright, would you like to make the motion that you really want to make?
I move that we extend the time for tonight's meeting beyond our scheduled cutoff time.
Second.
All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
On our very first one, too.
You win,
So
bingo.
we had a motion on the floor to move those back to Planning and Development, right? Thank you for
All those in
extending
favor of
them.
moving them back to Planning and Development, say
Aye.
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 Opposed? All right. Anything else, Counselor Cameron?
No.
Yes.
I think it was a voice vote. Am I right?
I'm going to vote no on that.
Voting no?
I'll be quick.
Right.
3 minutes. Councilor McCauley, see if you can wrap it up for us.
Okay, thank you, Council President. I'd like to make a motion to approve application 67, the Newburyport Lions Club Road Race.
Second.
In our committee meeting, we had Bob LaFrance and Bob Kolomecki show up via Zoom. They gave us the lowdown. They're going back to 2 races this year, the 5K and the 10 mile. Start and stop at NHS. The maps worked out. All the signatures, insurance, porta potties, all of that they've been doing for a number of years were intact. There were no issues or anything like that. So we voted 3-0 to approve.
All right, questions? All those in favor of approving it, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right.
Motion to approve Order 331, loading zone on Green Street.
Second.
Thank you. This has all come with in relation to outdoor dining. The Mission Oak was approved for their application in the park, Brown Square. But given the rates and their occupancy over the last couple of years, they've decided that that was too much for them, and they still wanted to do that. They approached the sponsor, which is Councilor from Ward 2, to see if there was a way that they could come out in front of their building. And that created some issues because there is, they kind of have a funky out front, which is listed as a loading zone, but also, and it runs 60 feet in front of their building a little bit for. But they have a 2-hour spot. Then they have a driveway where their trash is, their dumpster is. They park a car there, and then they have like another 40 feet on the other side. And that's all kind of used throughout the day going forward. So what we're suggesting here is a temporary suspension of the loading zone portion, which would allow them to apply for a parklet out in front. It'll probably be in the 20-foot range. They've asked for a 40-foot range, but they don't have the room for that. So it'll probably be over time a 20-foot type of scenario. There will be room for some deliveries to pull off the street. It is wide enough that they can potentially double park for the time being. Part of this is we're going to ask the owner to rejigger their delivery time frames, so they might be in the morning as opposed to later in the afternoon. Those types of things to alleviate some of the stress and concern of people coming downtown along the way. But we will keep that 2-hour parking spot there as well, so we're not opening another can of worms as well. So the recommendation was 3-0 to approve that.
All right. Further questions? All right. All those in favor of Order 331, the loading zone for Green Street, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Councilor?
And Council President, we continued with our invitation of different personnel. We invited the parking clerk to come join us to give us an overview of some of the things that are going on in his department that he'd like to give us a heads up on. He started out by saying there's a lot of things that are busy and going on in parking, more so than just the day-to-day aggravation that we all create and complain about. There was a new handicap spot on Liberty. I think there's a follow-up question to how many handicap spots we actually have in the whole city altogether on that. The 15-minute spaces went in. Ironically, that was the same day that they got complaints from the A-frame signs on the 15-minute spot, so the timing was good along the way. And this is the part that I think is interesting, and I think that the parking clerk deserves some real praise for. We're going to lose some spots, one because of parklets, not a lot, but we're also going to lose them because of the redefined waterfront a little bit. So the question is, how do we grow that business? So the parking clerk has gone out, and which is one of the things that was referred to committee tonight, and has looked at some of the spaces that are private that could host cars and offering them a host agreement. The first one would be the Daily News. We think there's 28 spots there. We think that we could set up a unified system similar to what's going on at the post office as well as the Waterfront Trust. It's a win-win for both types of scenarios. If this works with approval from the council, I think the clerk and the clerk's office would be able to expand that throughout other parts of the city for those folks who might have an empty lot or things like that they would like to help monetize. It alleviates the enforcement, and it alleviates the complaints from a parking scenario, one throat to choke along the way. And the things that are on the longer range plan is potentially the Plum Island lot, which would generate from revenue out there as well and keep some revenue out there. Again, be more unified, maybe allow some residential stickers out there as well. But that's all pie in the sky that we've got to talk about going future. But for this year, those are the items that he wanted to share with us, and I yield. Thank you.
Sounds like a good conversation. Thank you, Councilor McCauley. All right, only 4 minutes. So I believe that's the end. Regular. Sorry, Councilor Vogel. Rules.
Nothing to report.
Utilities.
Nothing to report.
Good of the order. Councilor Lang, and then Councilor Cameron.
I just want to say this is the second meeting that I've attended that I felt disrespected by members of this body. I'm not really going to stand for it anymore. If I have to mail in my votes from here on out, I will. I don't need a reply. I don't need a message. I'm just saying that's how I feel. Also, license permits has nothing to report for the night.
Councilor Cameron.
Just a reminder, and I'll send an email. Andy Port, the planning director, had sent us a memo in the March 28th packet about the so-called MBTA communities guidelines. So this is some new state legislation that came out in 2020 that made some changes in Mass General Law 40A. It's trying to encourage MBTA communities to increase multifamily zoning, which we do have quite a bit near our commuter rail. Every community, to keep their interim designation, has to have some sort of a public meeting where the guidelines are reviewed, and ours is going to be this Wednesday at 7 o'clock. I'll send the calendar invite if you've missed that, but I'll send Andy's original memo just so we can listen in and start to learn about that.
Thank you very much, Councilor. Anything else? You just did.
Did you mention the time?
7 o'clock on, it's remote, on Wednesday.
Great, thank you.
Okay.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
That's the right.